As the 20th century progressed, art became more abstract and minimalistic. For a few years in the 1930s, though, that trend seemed to reverse. With a new mass media landscape, corporations and dictators alike needed to figure out new ways to propagandize people. Today on Radio Free History, it's episode 13 of How Art Got Ugly. We've started some of these episodes with our Beavis and Butthead shtick, us making color commentary about certain hideous pieces of art. We're going to do the same shtick today, only we're going to be critiquing some of the paintings made by Der Fuhrer himself.
Yeah, it's interesting as we explore these paintings. I just want to note, if they'd been better, we might be living in like a completely different timeline.
Now, we are going to be completely fair here. Maybe he was rejected from art school for good reason. Maybe he was a completely talented artist who was kept out by a certain ethno-religious group. I don't know. We're going to give this a fair shake.
It's blah. It's like there's nothing here really to critique. One thing I want to notice, complete lack of people.
Yeah.
There's no humanity here.
Yeah, this is something you'd see in any artist's sketchbook. You go to any fine arts university, everybody with a funny-looking haircut has this exact drawing in his sketchbook or her sketchbook. Or
the standard issue.
Or their or their sketchbook, whatever the pronouns happen to be these days.
The sketchbook.
So this was the earliest painting of Hitler's that I could find. Yeah, I don't think we're off to the best start.
No, this isn't great.
This one is a little bit better, though.
I'm going to notice some phallic imagery immediately.
Yeah, this is called the Church of St. Charles in Winter. When Hitler was rejected from art school, they told him, buddy, you have no talent for drawing human beings. There is no life to them. There's no character. There's nothing that pops off the page. But you can draw buildings, so maybe you should look at architecture if you want to have a creative career. Hitler did have a flair for the dramatic, and this one looks more like something created by a set designer than an architect.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. It's very dramatic.
Yeah.
This is like, and again, the people, de-emphasized.
If you wanted a career in tech theater, you've probably got a portfolio full of drawings like this.
And a lesbian wife at home.
Yeah, that too. Again, I'm not going to say that Hitler had no talent, but I just don't see anything really special here.
Yeah, mediocre. Which is hard. If you're a narcissist, that's a really hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Is it like, if you ever want to really upset a narcissist, tell them they're fine.
Yeah. You're fully adequate.
If you hate them, you could be jealous. If you love them, you're accepting reality. If you're just like blah, they can't deal with it. So anyway, but I want to point out too, guys, like look at the animals and the people in this. He's right. They're very stiff.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're just.
Yeah.
They give little Spurges a test to see if they track their eye movements and see how long they look at people's faces.
Yeah.
And I think this is, I don't know, Spurge Hitler.
This is something that Bob Ross would have made.
It's no perspective. It looks like kind of like a Lord of the Ring background, kind of, because the mountains don't have the perspective that the Alpines do, or the Alps do.
I'm just waiting for Bob Ross to say this is a happy little accident here. This is probably better than anything I can do, but I've never taken a painting class. I'm sure that if you go take a painting class at the community college and you watch a bunch of reruns of Bob Ross, I'm not saying I could do this, but I'm saying there's a lot of people who could do this.
You can learn to do this. You don't need to be born exceptionally talented to do this. It's like painting Warhammer. So you can learn. It's Yeah. But again, no people.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of no people. Every art school reject has done still life at some point in his life.
Oh, yeah. You can see this. This is like, he's trying to be artsy. I like that the flowers are actually in a cup. There's like a little, you can tell it's like a little coffee cup or something. Like, there's a little handle on it down there. But again, yeah, there's something very sterile about this. There's something not It doesn't invoke passion.
This may speak to my autism more than anything else, but I just see his signature at the bottom right there, and I don't see the guy commanding rallies at Nuremberg. I just see a sad little artist.
Yeah, hustling paintings on the street of Vienna, eating at homeless
Yep,
shelters.
yep. Making sure that nobody's going to plagiarize his
It's
painting of
terrible.
flowers in a
Yeah,
vase.
he sued another bum for
Oh,
I think it was selling one of his art, getting some kind of art deal. It's like how Hitler, how would you even collect that?
yeah,
The guy's got no state, but you and it was to paint a picture here, guys. It's not
no pun
like
intended.
yeah, it's not like these are like art academy kids from gilded families. Like the bottom level of art, like the street art that Hitler did is like a rough, nasty place. Like you talk to any street performer,
Yeah, that's
like
carnies.
it's carny shit. At the end of the day, it's carnival shit, and it's not the best group of people that do it, and it's not it's certainly not like didn't wouldn't be like a romantic thing. It would be a rough life. Hitler street fighting later and leading his little street fighting gangs. I think that he learned that dynamic here on the streets of Vienna,
Yeah,
trying to sell his crappy paintings.
yeah.
He'd go store to store in Vienna, trying to like get local merchants to let him paint advertisements for them. And he would paint pictures of Vienna like tourist attractions and try and sell those.
All right,
And apparently a lot of Christmas trees. He really liked Christmas and Santa Claus, Sinterklaas.
all right. This one I will give him a little more credit for. This is called Alterhof, or the courtyard of the old residency in Munich. I do give him some credit for the color palette he chose. It is interesting. It's not a bright blue sky. He does capture the clouds. I will say, Adolf, wherever you are, you got clouds, right?
Can you hear us down there, Adolf? Yeah, the perspective bugs me.
Yeah,
That's the one thing. It's like the yellow brick road or whatever he's got down there doesn't freaking line up exactly. The
no,
shadows are off enough that it like twigs my autism. And there's no depth to the tree.
yeah, yeah. That's where my eye went as well. Again, maybe it says more to my autism as well. Um, Usually, when you look at somebody who's a master, sure, the stuff in the background, the trees are not always super detailed, but the main focal point of the painting is so stunning that it doesn't matter. Here, the building, the clouds, yeah, they look nice. I will give him that, but not nice enough to detract my eyes, but not nice enough to distract my eyes from that very mediocre tree on the left.
So if Hitler did jujitsu, he would be like a blue belt,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. If this was art, if he'd done jujitsu instead of art, he'd be about a blue belt.
All right.
He'd have a basic grasp of the basics. He'd be fine.
This is a little less fine though. This is Mother Mary with the Holy Child Jesus Christ, because every wannabe artist in those days had one or two attempts at religious iconography.
I like how Aryan little Jesus is. That's a very and yet mom's very Semitic. I think that's maybe a nod to the Virgin Mary. I don't know.
If you believe rumors, that may be a nod to Hitler's own family tree.
Yeah, well, what the other Nazis, then the other Nazis realized, like in his Bavaria days, realized this Hitler kid might be a problem. He kind of got out of hand. Um, and so they printed up a bunch of pamphlets being like, Hitler's acting like a Jew. And Hitler, he wasn't going to take that. So he sued them for slander. And that showed them that he was, when he took them to court for slander, that let him know. Like,
Did
anyway.
he
So.
find the slightest technicality to argue in front of the judge?
Well, that was very litigious. He didn't pay his taxes. He was always in trouble with the tax man.
All right.
Until he got out of jail and Mein Kampf. Then he could kind of say, and then even then he'd claim these extravagant write-offs.
So he got his money from publishing his book. Yeah, that showed how Aryan he was.
Successful publisher. I'm just saying he should come to. I want to see him in shul more. He doesn't come to shul.
So about this painting, again, the faces. sure, they're anatomically correct. Nothing pops about them. And because nothing pops about the human figures, the poor man's Van Gogh's sunflowers in the background, they just nothing distracts me from those.
Yeah, it's
Like
again
the
that
whole form just
flat,
doesn't work.
and then it's like the depth in the back right is too much. And then what is that? The freaking, he ran out of time to paint heaven. Like I get it's a creative choice, but it just doesn't. Again, doesn't. I've seen light like that coming down from the clouds, and it just it just doesn't capture it.
Again, this is Bob Ross shit.
This is most of Ontario.
Well, again, we can drive 25 minutes from here and be at a nice lake that's surrounded by cottages. This doesn't make me, want to go up to Manitoulin Island.
No,
It's
no, this is like the
it just doesn't.
depressing kind of like Deliverance kind of country instead
Yeah,
of that like fun-loving vacation, do a little fishing country.
yeah. I don't see a bunch of rednecks around this lake holding a grudge for 30 years over the pettiest shit. I don't see that here.
Trying to kill each other with kindness.
This is the ruin of a monastery in Mesen in 1914. So maybe he was a psychic who could see the future.
I was gonna say this is a little foreshadowing here in the Hitler thing.
Yeah,
Talk about the power of what are the idiots always talking about, like manifesting things. I guess maybe he manifested this because this is what most of Europe looked like when he was when that war was over.
This is the Schloss Belvedere. Again, this looks like a postcard. This is the equivalent of the guy at the boardwalk drawing your caricature.
Yeah.
Uh, sure, it kind of looks nice as a souvenir when you're from the country and don't know any better. When you live in the city, this is something handed to you by a carny.
Yep. Yeah, this is something that like a guy who's trying to buy drugs
Yeah.
is going to try to sell you.
Yeah, the guy who did this knows how to hustle you at 3-card Monte.
He might not have what you need, but he knows who to ask.
Yeah. Well, when somebody tries to sell you this, you want to have your hand on your wallet at all times.
They're aggressive too in Europe, and they're usually paying like to work like a good stretch of strip. You got to pay like a street artist pimp. It's really messed up. It's like these little gangs.
This is just called self-portrait.
Lonely little Adolf.
Yeah, you hear all the jokes about Hitler being the original emo kid. This is doing nothing to fight that image.
He was a miserable kid. He had one friend, and the friend ended up being a pretty good musician. So I guess Hitler like was the other artistic kid in this little upper Austrian town. And Hitler, after he dropped out of school in grade 10, and didn't do anything for 5-6 years until his mom died, um, he would just kind of roam the countryside with his friend and talk about how everything was messed up, but he knew how to fix it. So like just typical miserable theater kid. Like there's theater kids who are in theater because they like it, and there's theater kids that are in theater because they were really awkward and they hope that this is like a bridge to learn social skills. And like Hitler's kind of like the latter.
Yeah.
That's like some people who can't interface with other people. It's like it allows them to in mimicking in these dramatic presentations and stuff or art, they can kind of have that human interaction that they can't do interpersonally because of the defect of personality. So, but again, this is even Hitler looks like a little doll here. It's like, yeah, but again, speaks to again an isolation, a loneliness. The other kids clearly did not like Hitler.
But it doesn't speak to talent.
No.
Like the shitty band from high school that, back when Facebook wasn't just boomers arguing, they shithead from high school who would send you invites to his band playing at the dive bar on Tuesday nights. They would self-produce an album that had this as the cover art.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about that level. One of them painted a bit and ended up with this. It's kind of thing that would be done by AI now. Ooh, this is Salzburg's castle.
Yeah. Now you talked about the perspective lines being off. Perspective lines are really off on this one.
Now, when I was at Salzburg Castle, I was singing in a choir. We did this choir tournament, and we ended up as a choir on top of this as the sun was setting, with beautiful freaking thunderstorm coming in across the clouds. And then we formed up and we sang a cappella, kind of like a choral song. There's this really beautiful moment in this really beautiful place, and this just, again, it's a counterfeit. It's just like to really see how beautiful this place is. This is like make you cry beautiful. This city, Salzburg, is just gorgeous. People ask me the prettiest city I've ever seen is Salzburg. This is arguably the prettiest part of the prettiest city, and he screwed it up.
Yeah.
There's just nothing. This looks like Hogwarts.
Yeah.
This is just miserable. It's interesting though because Hitler was a slick speaker in his later years. He's not when he's an artist. He has a very rural accent, and he later, a gay guy in Bavaria, teaches, or in Munich, teaches him how to like fix his accent to be more presentable to, like, educated Germans basically in the north. But yeah, this
You're
is
telling me he was an awkward theater kid who got elocution lessons from
yep,
a gay guy?
from an old gay guy. And yeah, this castle is actually it was under siege at one point, and the guy was down to his last bull. And to trick the besieging army, he painted the bull different colors and kept marching it out to fool them into thinking that he had a herd left. And in German, they won't call you a bullshitter; they'll call you a bull washer. So it's interesting that this is kind of like, this is the setting of the you're a bullshit, guy, and this, or a bullshit speaker, and that's what he drew. So again, I'm seeing in his life story perhaps a nod to that, to his later life.
So, this is the selection of Hitler's art that I chose for this episode. I think it was fair. I think we've given him a fair shake with this. Draw whatever conclusions you want to draw, but I can't say he deserved that spot in the Vienna Art Academy in 1906 or whenever it was.
He's better than Banksy. I'll say that.
Sure, he's a better graffiti artist.
Punk rock Hitler, tagging all of Europe.
They just revealed who Banksy was. He's this overweight British boomer.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Well, let's recap where we are. We said last time that we're telling a story that starts in 1930, moves smoothly through World War II, and ends in about 1960. Schools generally teach a very low resolution story of the 1930s, which mentions the Great Depression, the New Deal, Hitler, Chamberlain, and the invasion of Poland. World War II is the origin myth of the current geopolitical order, centered on the United Nations, where things like German nationalism are absolutely forbidden.
And Prussia is no longer allowed to exist.
No, it isn't.
It's just got unpersoned a place.
How does that happen? How do people just meet and declare that Prussia no longer exists?
And how does, like, the Germans go along? Like, I'm curious how the Prussians felt about this. That's just
Well, since 1945, if you've wanted to keep a respectable career in academia, publishing, Hollywood, journalism, teaching, or any other knowledge based profession, there has only been one version of the story that you're allowed to tell. And that version starts with the Nuremberg trials, the Berlin airlift, Hiroshima, the Iron Curtain speech, the liberation of Auschwitz, and the signing of the UN Charter. Everything got so bad before that that we needed to hit the reset button on civilization. Now, you can frame World War II however you want, but good luck getting tenure at a university or getting a Hollywood studio to produce your movie, even if your movie is fiction. You basically have viewpoint freedom on most historical topics. You can describe Napoleon however you want to describe him.
Yeah, if you can say Napoleon's great.
Yeah, you can describe Henry VIII however you want to describe him.
You can call him fat and everything.
Yeah, not Hitler.
No.
There's only one acceptable framing of Hitler. More importantly, though, the bombings of Dresden, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, these are necessary evils, not atrocities. The post-war propaganda apparatus has it down to a science. You can talk about the period before the war. You can talk about the war, especially if you're focusing on the battles and the weapons, but not the politics. You can talk about the period after the war, but there's really only one thing that you're not allowed to do, and that is to tell a story that starts before the war, moves through the war, ends after the war, and comes to a negative conclusion, or even a nuanced conclusion. World War II has to be a moral crusade where we are all just so lucky to live under the new political order that was established. The problem is that there are always glitches in the matrix. There are certain things about the common World War II narrative that just don't hold up when you really scrutinize them. We're
Well,
not questioning that one, don't worry.
that one happened. Check my World War II episode. I make it clear that happened.
I'll give you an example though. The standard framing of World War II, it says that Germany and Japan had an alliance. Let's look at a map here. Before Pearl Harbor, the Americans were shipping supplies to Stalin through Vladivostok. See where Vladivostok is in that part of Russia that comes down on top?
Yeah, that's inconvenient.
To get there, you have to sail right through Japanese territorial waters. I've never heard of an alliance with a country that will allow your enemies to use their territorial waters to attack you.
So this is interesting. Basically, Japan, before they attacked America, they signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviets, and Hitler said, "Can you please stop letting the Americans ship all these bombs and guns through Vladivostok, or through Vladivostok across the Trans-Siberian Railway to the front lines?" And the Japanese said, "Well, we don't. We have this pact with the Soviets. We don't want to upset them. We're at war in the South. We're stressing the South right now. So sorry. We have a non-aggression pact. That's it. Russia, the Soviets are your problem."
If one of the most basic facts about the war turns out not to be true, i.e., that Germany and Japan never had an alliance, what else is untrue about the story of the war?
Their interests very rarely aligned. I know a lot less about the Pacific theater, but in terms of like Japan coming onto stage of the European theater, it's very limited. Hitler went to the Japanese, and because Hitler really, really wanted the Japanese to attack the Russian East, and the Japanese had said, "Okay, we'll sign a pact whereby if we go to war or you go to war, we'll all be at war together, right?" And Hitler and Mussolini too go, "Okay," and then they attack America, and then they go to Hitler and say, "Hey, we have this pact. Why aren't you going to attack the Russians?" No, no, we have a non-aggression pact with the Russians. Can you at least stop the arms shipments? No. The telegram they sent was particularly patronizing. It is in our interest to stress the South at the moment. So yeah, they were. It's weird that the Japanese maybe made a deal that was not, maybe surprised him, or were or were somewhat deceptive in getting what they want. That's very strange.
If the whole idea of the Axis alliance is a glitch in the matrix, what other glitches in the matrix are there? Well, the biggest glitch is Joseph Stalin. He was on our side during the war, but Stalingrad is always portrayed as Godzilla versus Mothra, a showdown between two notoriously evil dictators.
Whoever win, Gopnik lose.
Yep. That's any Russian war, by the way.
That's any Russian anything. They can't build infrastructure without killing these people. It's fascinating.
When you read anti-Stalin Cold War propaganda, it talks about the brutality of the 5-year plan, the Holodomor, and the Great Purge. But all those things happened well in advance of the war. At Nuremberg, the Nazis were given show trials for breaking these non-existent laws under the guise of moral crimes or crimes against humanity. They even put newspaper editors to death. But all of those so-called crimes against humanity were oddly gerrymandered so as not to include Stalin. When the economy is booming and everything just kind of works out, it's a much easier sell to say it's complicated and trust us. FDR and Churchill had a pretty good reason for allying with Stalin. But unfortunately, things are no longer just working out. Uh, at least we're not speaking German packs much less of a punch when everyone at the grocery store is speaking Punjabi and Arabic.
Yeah.
After 1945, this good versus evil image is magically transposed onto Stalin, and the Cold War is framed as another head to head chess match of two totalizing worldviews.
Another evil mustache.
Yeah, well, yeah, one side is unquestionably good and one side is unquestionably evil, and nobody ever stops and asks, wait a second, how was it so convenient that the formula of Hitler as Sauron became immediately applicable to Stalin?
Yeah. I think Mr. Orwell wrote a book about that.
Yeah. Well, this is not another rehash of a documentary like Architecture of Doom about the art and architecture of the Third Reich. That movie was well done, and I suggest you guys watch it if you're interested. But it plays right into this Hannah Arendt framing where a totalitarian is a totalitarian is a totalitarian. Hitler is basically a Disney villain who starts off as a failed artist, then rises to power in a political party full of failed creatives. And then he replaces everything in Germany with this ostentatious classical art about German superiority. Then he starts World War II and gets his ass kicked, and now he's remembered as the most evil man who ever lived. Uh, but you know what? You see the same game played whenever you watch a documentary about Soviet art under Stalin. It works as long as the story is completely self-contained and you don't see any interaction with the rest of the world throughout the 1930s. But the propaganda really starts to break down when you look at Europe as a whole and you realize, wait a second, these guys weren't two Saurons in charge of their own personal Mordor. These were just two of many European leaders interacting on the global stage. So we're not telling another story of Hitler or another story of Stalin. In fact, we're not even going to tell a story of Hitler versus Stalin. This is a story about the 1930s. And we need to establish a timeline of the 1930s because every historical event from the 30s just feels dislodged in time. Here's an example. Let's just consider one year, 1937. 1937 was arguably the height of Nazi aesthetics with the opening of the House of Art in Munich. 1937 was also the height of the Moscow trials and the Great Purge, where hundreds of thousands of Russians ended up dead or gulagged for saying anything that could be perceived as slightly critical of the party. Solzhenitsyn had a wonderful account of that
Yep.
period.
He had another book too, but we can't talk about that one
No.
on YouTube.
So the year 1937 is a huge milestone in every narrative of totalitarianism. But give or take a year, what else happened between 1936 and 1938? Italy had just gone to war with Abyssinia, now known as Ethiopia, proving the uselessness of the League of Nations. They did get sanctioned by Britain and France, but that just made Mussolini get closer to Hitler, and that certainly drew the battle lines when World War II happened. Spain was having a civil war. France was devolving into chaos after the election of the Popular Front. Some people think that had World War II not happened, France would have gone into a civil war just the same way that Spain did.
Can you imagine the slap fight of a French Civil War?
It's the joke, why did the French have so many civil wars? So that they can win one every once in a while. It's sad. The French actually do have a great military history, but they went 0-3 versus Germany.
It's like
Sometimes,
in jail. Like you can be the toughest guy on the block, but like somebody essays you, no, you're done. You're a
yep,
bitch forever.
yep.
It's just you'll never regain your manhood. It's the same kind of. That's how thoroughly Germany freaking took it to France those
Yep.
3 times.
Yeah. Japan was invading China. They
Oh, speaking of taking it to people.
Yep. Yeah, the Japanese also unveiled an airplane called the Kamikaze, which is a bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah, for anybody who's upset about British colonialism, just check out Japanese colonialism.
And this is where it started.
Yep.
1937. The first amphetamine pills were made available, and that's going to play a role in both Hitler's behavior during World War II and the mid 20th century culture more generally.
Yeah. Nazis and meth, man. It's a big year for Nazis. That's when they got their meth.
Edward VIII had abdicated in 1936 to marry an American divorcee, and the war may have gone quite differently if Britain had a pro German king.
It's a good thing we don't have any like snooty royals abdicating now
Yeah.
for their awful American wives.
They say that's the one rule of being a British royal is never marry an American. Harry, you had one job. One job. Reefer Madness came out in 1936.
Oh wow, big year for hippies.
Yeah.
This is the
Well, the next year, the Americans passed the Marijuana Tax Act.
so they said it like Hank Hill.
Yeah, they still spelled it with an H, not a J.
The marijuana poisoning.
Yeah, the Marijuana Tax Act didn't necessarily make weed illegal, but it taxed weed so heavily that it might as well have been.
Yeah, apparently they this is like a constitutional workaround. This is like they did the same thing when they wanted to ban machine guns.
Well, the war on drugs started during the Nixon years when the Marijuana Tax Act was deemed unconstitutional.
We need another reason to lock up hippies and blacks before they do the really bad crime.
In the arts, Mount Rushmore was being built.
Fuck you, Blackfoot.
I think it was the Lakota, but it
All
doesn't
of
really
them.
matter.
Look what we did to your god.
The Lakota moved onto that land in 1776. Don't tell me they have any more of a legitimate claim to that land than the Americans do. But you know what? All we hear about is the low resolution stuff like Chamberlain trying to appease Hitler. All this stuff was happening in 1937. The 1930s are not some historical black hole where everybody was poor and unemployed waiting for the war to break out.
They say there's work in California.
Yeah, that's Steinbeck shit.
Damn, this Dust Bowl.
Yeah, if you had been alive in 1937, it would not have been obvious that the then current German aesthetics were going to become the embodiment of all that was evil.
Yeah, it's like how if you were alive in like 2009, like, punk revival became like the uniform of progressives.
Yeah.
And MMA people. So it's weird. It's just like a snapshot in time. It's interesting. It's like the Mormons still wearing prairie garb.
Yep. Well, let's do a thought experiment.
Ooh.
Imagine you're a god sitting on Mount Olympus on a perch where you can look down and watch all of Europe. Hitler took power in January of 1933. In 1939, he signed a pact with Stalin and invaded Poland. In 1941, he broke that pact and invaded Russia, and that didn't go so well.
Stalin had a mental breakdown.
Well, in 1945, the Third Reich was eradicated for good when the Russians and the Americans rolled into Berlin. Objectively speaking, the whole story of the Third Reich was less than 13 years, the last few of which were spent at war, so that's like 7 years of Nazi culture.
So just long enough to get bar mitzvah.
Well, it's a flash in the pan. From the point of view of the god on Olympus, Hitler is just a really awful military strategist, not like a pillar of the moral narrative of the 20th century.
Just another bad general.
There's two reasons why we see Hitler as the embodiment of all evil. First of all, the post-World War II political order is like any other political order. It needs to be held in place by propaganda, and the Hannah Arendt worldview is perfect for that purpose. It is a lot easier to accept the system of American hegemony when you have an origin myth that's basically Star Wars, where, as I said earlier, there's a light side, a dark side, and not much nuance. And the convenient thing about this Hannah Arendt formulation, where totalitarian and evil are synonyms, is that you can transpose that low-resolution framing onto Stalin without missing a beat and frame the Cold War the exact same way. The second reason that we have this image of Hitler and Stalin, germane to this series is the artwork that came out of 1930s Germany and Russia. This came out of that brief time window before television was ubiquitous. It was the early 20th century, so technology had already advanced to what we would now call mass media. The state could mass produce images like this and put them on the front of a textbook that would be seen by every student. But it was also too early to broadcast images into everybody's living room. In this episode, we're going to look at propaganda techniques more closely, but when you compare the Soviet Union to the Third Reich, the artistic differences are really just different twists on the same themes. The monumental portrait of the leader, the masses looking happy to be part of the system, the battle painting, or one of a few other genres or conventions. But before we look down too much on our 1930s predecessors for being propagandized by stuff like this, I challenge you to come up with a picture of Nazi Germany or post-revolutionary Russia that was not heavily influenced by one of these paintings. We were just as influenced by it as they were. Can you come up with an image of Stalin in your head that does not look exactly like this painting on the left?
I can't, but Hitler, I've seen pictures of him in lederhosen with dogs.
Yeah, okay, fair.
But I had to go out of my way to find that, and it was like really weird to see him all happy in lederhosen and playing with his dogs. Like, it stuck out as something you don't normally see Hitler portrayed as. It,
Yep.
makes sense.
Well, again, it's because yes, there were video cameras, yes, there were primitive televisions, but this was the primary form of propaganda back then.
This is the meme of its day.
Exactly. Now, a totalitarian state is, by definition, one that's centered on an ideology. Totalitarian regimes, they are strictly a 20th century phenomenon because until World War I, there was nothing that felt morally wrong about having a king or a nobility who declared laws without having to justify their legitimacy. Woodrow Wilson and the United States jumped into the war in 1917, backed up by a virtually infinite capacity for wartime manufacturing. And Wilson would not allow Europe to sue for peace until the continent was safe for democracy, which meant that the Habsburgs, the Hohenzollerns, the Romanovs, and the Ottomans were forced to give up their empires. Americans have never quite understood that their academic theories don't become reality by bombing countries on other continents. We are recording this a couple weeks into the Iran war. If you're looking back on this in a couple of years, I'm not expecting that to be a story with a happy ending, but who knows?
I want to know who has to explain to Trump what the Strait of Hormuz is. I just want to know who they sent in to do that. That's what I'm waiting for the secret files to drop, so I can get that the transcript of that conversation, because that's going to be comedy gold.
Yep. The 20s and 30s gave the world the phenomenon of dictators holding essentially monarchical powers, but doing it in the name of an ideology that claims to speak for the people. And that is how we got Mussolini, Lenin, Stalin, and Hitler, because the continent was safe for democracy.
Big ideas.
We did an episode on 1920s Italy when Benito Mussolini famously declared everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. It might be more accurate to say everything within the ideology, nothing outside the ideology, nothing against the ideology. An ideology is not just based on vibes, though. It has to be written down and it has to be coherent. You can only use force to keep the boot on people's necks for so long. It does work for a little while, don't get me wrong, but it's clumsy, and eventually, even if they have to fatalistically submit to it, they're not going to believe in what you're selling.
Well, their output's going to be lower.
That too.
Because they'll have no buy-in for the system,
Yep,
other
exactly.
than not, getting killed by the system. So
Well, even Stalin's Great Purge, it only lasted about 18 months. At some point, you need a story that people buy into, as you said. Even if it's a nonsensical ideology that you pay lip service to if you want to keep your bureaucratic make-work job. Now, that ideology doesn't need to be static. It can change over time, but at any given moment, it has to be coherent. And that means that you don't just need propaganda, you need an intellectual apparatus to support it. And at least in this regard, let's not pretend that the West is any different from the Third Reich. What is a university degree in the 21st century other than training for ideological compliance for a government make-work job? Progressivism, it has been the ideology of the US government since Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, and the de facto ideology of every Western bureaucracy since the UN was established. If you get a job for a small company in the private sector, you can believe whatever you want, but let's not pretend that there isn't huge money in the shakedown racket over DEI compliance. But there is a difference now. I'm not going to pretend that the current world is exactly like the Third Reich in every way. Since the 70s, our overlords seem to have lost all confidence in their global project to use bureaucracies and foreign aid to spread American progressive values to the globe. Like, can you believe this? In 1965, a U.S. Supreme Court justice resigned so that he could be appointed as ambassador to the UN, and this was seen as a promotion. This is how much faith people had in this utopian project back then.
Can you imagine that now? It's like, I'm going to step down from chairman of the Federal Reserve to manage a Wendy's.
Well, it's like the UN's a shit show. Like, what, you can babysit some African dictator as he comes along with his hand held out for
Okay, guys, we want to spend
foreign aid.
We want to spend a little money on infrastructure. Yes, we will condemn Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Yes, we did infrastructure funding and we condemn Israel. Okay, fine. Yeah, that's okay. Everyone's voting. Our Arab League vote. Okay, good.
Yeah. Well, that's today. In the 1960s, the American ruling class had so much confidence that their pet project was going to produce Star Trek that it was seen as a step up when you resigned from the Supreme Court to work for the UN. And if that's not bizarre enough for you, 10 years before that, the term third world had a positive connotation because the UN was supposed to be the vehicle through which Africa unlocked its potential after it cast off the shackles of colonialism.
Holy God. They had no idea.
Yeah. One piece of context is almost always missing from narratives about the Suez Crisis, and that's the Americans honestly believed that the UN was going to turn Africa into a continent full of Wakandas. This was not just, ghetto people going to see that movie. The American ruling class honestly believed this.
Wakanda forever.
They took this.
What happened to my daughter's clitoris?
Well, up until the 70s, they took this idea as seriously as Hitler took National Socialism or as Trotsky took international communism. But now, in the 2020s, the bureaucrats, they still make a half-hearted attempt to propagandize us into this ideology, but their heart really isn't in it. They seem more interested in protecting their jobs as university administrators and professional wet blankets. It's a far cry from the 70s when boomer women were burning their bras in the name of liberation and boomer men had the promise of a lot of loose women if they mouthed the platitudes.
Yeah, and that was back when there was like Weather Underground and stuff was going on.
But on a fundamental level, the role of the post-1945 university system is not that different from the role of the Komsomol or the Hitler Youth, in that it's the ideological training ground for all of the most useless government make-work jobs. But going back to the 1920s and 1930s, this thing called art, whatever it is, it was viewed as an intellectual endeavor, which means that it had to be part of this intellectual apparatus. Mussolini and Stalin, they were happy to outsource that to others, but not Hitler. He, being rejected by the Vienna Academy of Art when he was 18, was not the type to go back to his hometown and say, well, at least I tried. He stayed in Vienna, and let's be generous and say that he hustled up a bit of work as a street artist.
That would be kind. He ate in soup kitchens.
At one point, he tried to write an opera.
Oh, wow. Hitler the opera. Can you imagine?
Well, if you read Mein Kampf, and keep in mind when you read Mein Kampf, you're dealing with an extremely unreliable narrator. But in that book, his biggest beef with the Jews was their presence in the Vienna cultural scene, where one of them would produce a play or an opera that he thought was absolute garbage, and then every newspaper had one Jewish critic that was praising it. and all of the praise was eerily similar.
I would have no idea what that would
Yeah.
be like.
Yeah, we're all thinking it. But the 1920s was a very specific time in history when, in the aftermath of World War I, Europe was now safe for democracy. And at that period, a lot of creative energy was transferred out of the arts and into these burgeoning political and revolutionary movements. So, one Adolf Hitler was in the right place at the right time when the newly formed NSDAP needed a failed artist to be in charge of their propaganda. And when Hitler rose to power in 1933, art was not just important, it was arguably his top priority, even more so than nationalism and eugenics. Now, Hitler was not cut from the same cloth as a medieval warlord. He was cut from the same cloth as the creative director at your local community theater group. And I hear you saying, but the creative director is an eccentric middle-aged woman who just like she. Yes, he is cut from the same cloth as she is. When the Nazis took over Paris in 1940, he wasn't Conan the Barbarian looking to crush his enemies, see them driven before him, and hear the lamentations of their women. He was talking about how it was his childhood dream come true that he finally got to see Paris in person.
I'm
we
going to the Moulin Rouge.
we all know multiple nerdy kids from the hinterlands who work a dead-end job, saving up money to fly to Paris and come back feeling affirmed because they got to take a picture of the Mona Lisa at the Louvre.
It's disappointing.
I know, but that was Hitler.
Yep.
His country took over France.
Yep.
His country defeated France militarily, and that was still Hitler.
Yep. He's still going to the Louvre.
These days, I would think that every mid-level bureaucrat on a diplomat's staff has been to Paris. But Hitler was starstruck from getting to see Paris in 1940 after an invasion.
It's like when you realize just how poor ancient Rome was
Yep.
in terms of like agricultural output. It's
Yep.
like that. It's like deflates the whole thing.
Yep.
Like,
Well, it was at the point where Hitler only went to Paris for all of 3 or 4 hours. And in that time, he went to the Paris Opera House, and he could tell that they had done renovations because he had memorized the blueprints of every major theater in Europe.
Spur.
Yeah, this is who we're dealing with here.
Yeah, I know this kid well. This is a troubled arts kid. This is every Aspie. They put him in the arts to freaking like get him to try to learn some social skills. And he freaking sonnet something and it ruins his life.
Yep. So when Hitler came to power, he was concerned with this monumental art and aesthetics. This is called the 30th of January, 1933. I highly doubt that Berlin looked like this when Hitler was finally sworn into power, but it tells an image. It tells a story.
Oh, this is what those you will not replace as kids were going for.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Well, exactly. Again, we can make fun of people in the 30s for being propagandized, but I challenge you to come up with an image of the 1930s in either Germany or Russia that did not come out of one of these paintings.
Yep.
And again, I'm not just picking on Germany either. Let's look at Russia. This is supposedly the Russian Revolution, the storming of the Winter Palace. Like there were women on guard that night. They talk about all the guards capitulated. Like there weren't that many guards at the palace that night.
This is like right out of Les Miserables.
Yeah, I know.
Red. The dawn of angry men.
Well, but when it comes to propagandizing the masses and Hitler leaning on his talents as a failed creative, you have to look at one thing first and foremost, and that's the Nuremberg rallies. What are the Nuremberg rallies if not just large-scale theatrical productions on par with a band playing a stadium with lots of rigging and pyrotechnics?
Yeah. And this is something really primal.
Yep.
This is like, I would argue, like the political revival.
Well, if you watch Architecture of Doom, they describe Hitler as the director, set designer, and leading actor. Now, if you've ever done theater at any level, even if it's just low-level community theater, the lowest of the lowest rungs. You know exactly the personality traits of the guy who can be director, set designer, and leading actor. There's a very, very narrow set of personality traits that person has.
They call it the dark triad.
Yeah. You also know the percentage breakdown of the sexual orientations of that guy's circle of friends, and that's true of Hitler as well.
Yeah. A lot of gay Nazis.
Especially his bodyguards,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
In the totalitarian state, the art needs to embody the ruling ideology in some way. And the thing about a large theatrical rally is that it really does concretize the idea of the Volk, or the people as one unified body. Nazi propaganda characterized certain ethnic groups as parasitic, verminous, diseased, pestilent, infectious, invasive, insect-like.
He did not go easy on the Slavic peoples, let me tell.
Well, you also got to remember, though, that this language was extra tangible when people saw themselves as part of a body with a nervous system and a circulatory system, especially because it was only 50 years prior, in the 1880s, which was in living memory, when scientists discovered that disease spread through germs and not miasma.
That was important.
So it's easy to fall into the trap of drawing too many parallels between Hitler and Stalin because of Cold War propaganda, where they're both slight variations on Darth Vader. Like, for example, post-war literature tends to draw a parallel where Hitler and Stalin are both engaged in the pursuit of the new man. This is not completely inaccurate, but it's also not completely honest either. Like, in the Soviet Union, the new man was an explicit ideological concept, the capital N, new, capital M, man. The Nazis did use the phrase new man in numerous speeches. You'll find translations of Hitler's speech where he talks about the new man. But that was much more informal. I mean, it's not exactly a stretch to say that the idea of the new man and the Übermensch were ever present in Nazi ideology. But, in the interest of accuracy and completeness, new man is spelt with a capital N when we're talking about Russia and a lowercase n when talking about Germany. In an essay titled Marxism and Art, Gio Severini said that in the 1940s Soviet Union, the new man didn't have the, quote, climate to be born, but if such a man were to be born, he would horrify you. Well, Hitler and Stalin both used the same formula for trying to put forth their ideologies, and that's not terribly different from how we're propagandized in the post 1945 West. I don't think we exactly have the climate for the birth of the new man either here.
No, not with our population curve.
No. But you see the same formula everywhere. First of all, you have the party directives, which are steeped in ideology, but general enough that they could be implemented in many different ways. Then you had a chorus of social scientists, and as time went on, more and more of the hard scientists, who justified party directives with official sounding theories. That sounds familiar enough in the modern era, as since about the 1950s, university social science departments have served as public relations firms for government policies as much as anything else. And that's unfortunately increasingly true of real science departments as well. Just look at the entire scientific apparatus not being sure of how many genders there are anymore.
Yep. Yeah, that's a dark day.
After the party directives, then you had certain kinds of culture, especially literature and cinema, but also things like theater, retelling the official sounding academic ideological stuff, but packaging it in a way that the masses can consume and feel smart. Then
feminist frequency.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's a great example of that. But then after all that, you had high art, usually in the form of painting and sculpture, which endowed the official ideology with an almost mythical or ethereal aura. The quote unquote respectable artists were almost treated like prophets, getting revelations about the deep insights embedded in party directives and deep insights embedded in the official ideology. Today, most universities run on the arts and science model, which was a 19th century German invention. But you see that explicitly in totalitarian Germany, when Hitler's ideology rested really on two pillars: Nazi art and Nazi science, i.e., the eugenics program. At one point, 45% of medical doctors were members of the Nazi Party, and Hitler's chief doctor talked explicitly about using the medical profession to create the new man. When I went to school, I heard a lot of teachers and professors talk about Hitler attacking the university system like he was a troglodyte. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Nazism was an ideology that is almost tailor made for the arts and science university model. Now, I'm not going to say we live in a totalitarian society, but we do live in a society with an official ideology that we are coerced into believing. There are certain statements about race and gender that it's completely verboten to make in a professional setting. And increasingly, the state is willing to use its hard power to punish ideological noncompliance. They do this through things like human rights laws. But I'm trying to give an honest assessment of the situation in 2026. And I cannot honestly call our society totalitarian because our leaders still feel the need to show us performative opposition. Maybe not real opposition, but at least they pretend they do. I'm not worried about getting gulagged, at least not yet. But we absolutely see the same methods of propaganda that Hitler and Stalin used to create ideological conformity. And we see it every time an ugly piece of contemporary art is accompanied by a blurb about how a pile of refuse represents the struggle of existing in the West when you're gay or black or female or transgender, Jewish, Muslim, immigrant, or some other supposed outsider. And how the very existence of this exhibition indicates that capital P progress is being made. Under Western governments, our so called artists play the exact same role that Soviet artists and Nazi artists did as almost the clowns of the ideology. We talked about totalitarianism in general. Now we need to say a few words about propaganda in general, because then as now, the medium was the message. There was a lot of overlap in the 30s between the aesthetics of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, not least because they regularly copied each other. The development of communications technology mattered probably more than any specific content. Just look at how heavy handed the ideological messaging has become now that the people who propagandize us through television seem to have no finesse with social media.
It's because they're 85.
But they haven't saved for retirement.
I got to keep working. They got all their deadbeat kids and grandkids to support.
Yep. Of course, their deadbeat kids could support their family if the boomers retired and let them move into the good jobs. That's crazy talk.
Yeah, it's insane. We can't.
Depending on how you define things, mass media has been around since about the 1890s or the 1900s. Thomas Edison invented the motion camera in the 1890s. Marconi invented a radio-based telegraph in 1895, and transatlantic telegraph service was then established in 1907. But it was in the 1920s and 1930s that propaganda techniques really came into their own, and these propaganda techniques were used to generate buy-in, or at least to generate acceptance of new ways of running society. Because this age was not just the rise of mass media, it was also the rise of what James Burnham called the managerial revolution, as society was becoming dominated by mass businesses and mass bureaucratic governments. You kind of needed a story to get everyone on the same page, and you did that through mass media. Now, I'm not just talking about fascist and communist governments when I say that. We are just as steeped in propaganda today. To just look at narratives about World War II and anything else that justifies the post 1945 geopolitical order. We're propagandized just as much as the people at the Nuremberg rally were.
No getting around it.
Uh, with the benefit of hindsight and with the benefit of Ted Kaczynski's manifesto,
Uncle Ted.
we can look back on the 20th century and laugh at how seriously people took the ideas of psychologists. The ideas of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and other psychologists were taken very seriously by scientists, by philosophers, by avant garde artists, by advertisers, by governments, and by propagandists. Here's the thing about the ideas of Sigmund Freud: there's nothing wrong per se with an incorrect scientific idea. We used to believe that phlogiston caused heat and miasma caused sickness. We were profoundly mistaken, but it never got in the way of some of the best art and some of the most profound philosophy ever written. Freud's ideas were used to inspire Salvador Dali and the Surrealists, and there's nothing wrong with that either. The problem is that after World War II, a lot of quackery, like the authoritarian personality, was used to guide government policy, and governments could enforce this policy using vast bureaucratic systems that never existed before. And that's when it becomes a problem that you're, trusting the ideas of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was taken seriously well past the late 40s and the 50s, when people like Skinner were able to design experiments that actually used the scientific method. And some people started to wonder if psychoanalysis was maybe, shall we say, colored by Freud's own psychosexual issues.
Homie thought cocaine cured depression.
Yeah. Well, Andrew Clavin made a great observation when he talked about the role of the psychologist in cinema as the second half of the 20th century progressed. First, you had Psycho in 1960, inspired by Ed Gein, where the movie ends with a psychologist explaining how Norman Bates went crazy. The role of the psychologist was so respected in 1960 that this was a cathartic ending. Then in the 70s, it was the golden age of the slasher horror film, where there was often a psychologist who said, I don't know what's wrong with Michael Myers. I can't explain it using my psychology. It must be something supernatural. Michael Myers wasn't directly based on Ed Gein, but he was spiritually influenced by Ed Gein. Then in 1991, you had another movie inspired by Ed Gein, The Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, that's a great one.
Where the psychologist is now the villain who has to be consulted, but he can't exactly be trusted because he can use his training to manipulate people.
Hello, Clarice.
So clearly, within the span of just over 30 years, the role of the psychologist had become a lot less respected.
Yeah.
And rightfully so.
Oh, yeah, this is...
Now, with psychology, as with anything else, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Freud's ideas contained at least enough truth to give us Woody Allen, and Jung's ideas contained at least enough truth to make Luke Skywalker resonate. Freud and Jung were brilliant writers on the human condition, but so was Shakespeare. I am always amazed how a Shakespeare passage can be extremely relevant to a modern or contemporary situation, but that does not mean that Shakespeare's ideas are supposed to be elevated to scientific laws. And I feel the same way about Sigmund Freud.
Yeah, homie was like, you got to put him in the camp of like philosopher. If you're gonna get anything out of him at all, at
absolutely.
this point, like
propaganda techniques, they came into their own after World War One. After tooling up for the war effort, factories had the capacity to produce so much abundance that the biggest danger was now overproduction. And if the goal was progress, you needed to grow the economy every year. And one way to do that was convincing people to buy shit that they wanted instead of buying the things that they needed and putting the rest of the money in a savings account. After World War I, we shifted from a production-based economy to a consumption-based economy, and psychology became big business. Most obviously, this was seen in the rise of advertising and public relations. But the layers of propaganda went and still go a lot deeper than that. For example, every time you walk into a department store, even today, the layout was designed by an investment banker from the 1930s named Paul Mazur, who wanted to maximize the number of purchases people made on a trip to Macy's. So he separated things by category. In many ways, the digital age is a combination of the new online world and the outside world, which was set up in the 1920s and 30s and has never really changed since then.
Like the QWERTY keyboard.
Yep. Well, exactly. But we did not learn about physics by telling professors to do a bunch of experiments in a quiet lab. We learned physics from building the atomic bomb. If you open an electrical engineering textbook, all of the pioneering names are not professors. These are people who worked for the United States Department of Defense. The truth is that post World War I, we learned a lot about human psychology, but it did not come from the theory of intellectuals. It came from trial and error, now that mass media could be used as a tool of propaganda. And it came from experimenting to see what messaging worked and what messaging didn't work. This ramped up in the 40s and 50s as every family moved out to the suburbs to a house with a room purpose built for television.
The medium is the message.
Absolutely. Walter Lippmann wrote Public Opinion in 1922 about how we should give everyone the right to vote because now the experts can use broadcast media to convince the masses into voting the right way. So it's not really what the people want. It's we can now use television to convince people to vote for what we want. He called it manufacturing consent. Sigmund Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, pioneered the field of public relations in the 1920s, both for politicians and for corporations. Famously, he convinced women to start smoking by telling photojournalists to take pictures of women who he planted at the Easter parade who would pull out a cigarette. And then he would run a front page story in every newspaper in America calling cigarettes torches of freedom. That is, smoking is a symbol of emancipation from gender roles. Just look at this. This messaging of gender equality and breaking chains is catnip to Americans.
Well, to this day, right? The bad girl will smoke.
Yep.
Anyway, just it's like these tropes stayed in the culture.
Yep.
But just the power of the product pairing, and this is you talking about Skinner. I know this is maybe a little bit after this, but you're pairing a primary and a secondary stimulus.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
You're probably your women, young, attractive, sexually liberal women with a product.
Yep.
Bam. And it doesn't matter what it doesn't matter. He will affect you a little tiny bit to a varying degree, but it all affects all of us in a certain way.
Well, I just want to say that one of the biggest victories for first wave feminism was getting a Jewish guy to convince women to spend all their money on cigarettes.
Keeps you thin.
Well, the Europeans, they didn't have the space or the money for everyone to move out to a white picket fence in the suburbs. But 1930s Germany and Russia were certainly lessons in mass propaganda, and that brings us back to some of these paintings. This art was in that weird pre-television time window when technology was good enough to mass produce these things, put them on posters, whatever, get everybody to see these things. But it was also too early to beam images into everybody's living room through a television screen. So Soviet art and Nazi art were similar in a lot of ways, not just because they were copying each other, but because they were both looking for the best way to propagandize the masses with 1930s technology. And when something works for one group of people, human psychology doesn't differ that much. It's going to work for the other group of people as well.
Like Charles Manson figuring out how to brainwash hippie kids.
Well,
what works?
Well, I'm just going to show you one example of a propaganda painting from each country, and you'll clearly see the similarity between the two. This is Hitler addressing a group of masses, the happiest group of Germans I've ever seen in my life.
This is my birthday.
This is called In the Beginning Was the Word.
Oh, wow.
And here is Stalin addressing a factory. You see the same conventions used in both places.
He's telling them all they're going to a gulag.
Yep. Oh,
You have not met quota, comrades.
He's telling these new mothers that they only have to work 16 hours in the factory.
Yeah.
Now,
You get 2 hour break when baby born, and back on the line.
if another totalitarian were to rise to power today, his propaganda would not look like this. Technology is different today, and the monumental portrait is not the most resonant image in the social media age.
It's like Iran is making little TikToks
Yeah.
about the Strait of Hormuz
Yep.
right now. Like
That it is.
that's where we're at, folks.
Yeah.
And Russia's really good at that too. Anyway.
I mean, I get it. Andrew Tate is probably tapping into the same atavisms as these paintings are when he's smoking a cigar, talking into a camera, pretending he's addressing a huge mass of nerds.
That's why he's always wearing a leisure suit.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm saying like just this painting just wouldn't quite pop if Stalin were wearing a tracksuit,
Weekend
like
at Bernie's,
like a proper Russian gangster,
squatting, eating freaking sunflower seeds.
Yeah. But you certainly see the historical conventions of 19th century German and 19th century Russian art in these paintings. But this is a time when mass propagandists are making things up as they go along and figuring out what works with human psychology, or at least human psychology at mass scale. For example, in our episode on Weimar Germany, we talked about Bauhaus designing everything for efficiency and mass production. One of the more interesting side effects of Bauhaus was a debate over the best fonts of all things, and not just aesthetically, but practically for being able to machine produce thousands of posters that could be easily read.
Medium is the message.
Exactly, yeah.
It's a Canadian that said that.
Well, Bauhaus gave the world very minimalist geometric typefaces and fonts like this. Like, you can at least read that.
Yeah.
Now, when Hitler...
I can't. I'm dyslexic.
Well, a dyslexic will at least have an easier time reading this than German Gothic script. But I mean, when Hitler rose to power, he thought that this streamlined mechanical typography was soulless cultural Bolshevism. So the Third Reich briefly mandated Gothic script because it was more German. You want to talk about stuff that dyslexics are going to have a hard time with.
This is giving me a seizure.
Well, but then the Nazis overturned this in 1941 and went back to the simplified stuff again. They banned Gothic lettering, and the official story was that Jewish lettering could somehow sneak its way in through this stuff. There are debates over fonts. When you read about these artistic debates of the era, it's almost weird how much energy was spent on debating fonts back then.
Like, the only word I've ever heard about fonts in my whole freaking life is like every miserable liberal arts teacher has a favorite font that they assume is universal, and everyone hates Comic Sans.
Well, the debates over fonts is just cosplaying the 30s, pretending that you're a Bauhaus student. Because remember, Bauhaus was the template for the insufferable art student. We went over that as well.
We're gonna save ink.
This lettering, call it beautiful if you're so inclined, and it certainly evokes a feeling of German traditionalism, but modernist lettering simply made better propaganda because it was easier to read.
Yep.
But going back to the more propagandistic aesthetics that we just looked at, we think of the modernist, minimal, abstract aesthetic as being emblematic of the 20th century of art. It was really just a throwback to 19th century aesthetics and often seen as a restoration. But make no mistake about it. It was totally a product of its technological era. The paintings of Stalin and Hitler addressing a mass of people. That was a product of the technological era just as much as these fonts were. Just as much as the modern art of the 1920s was. Most people didn't have a television, but publishing technology was at the point where a heavy-handed monumental painting could be printed a million times.
So it's like the early internet
Yeah,
where you
exactly.
got
Yep.
memes or a page, and now memes are a short video. Okay.
Yep. If we ever see another Hitler or Stalin, you are not going to see big portraits of dear leader on the side of a building because in the digital age, it's just not a terribly effective way to trigger a response, at least not at mass scale. Nike could sell its shoes to the boomers by writing "Just Do It" on a billboard and putting that billboard on every interstate in America. Now it's so hard to generate mass culture that the goth subculture has come, gone, and been revived I don't know how many times. And it really didn't matter because Hot Topic has been selling the same line of Nightmare Before Christmas t-shirts since about 1993.
There's always that one big girl
Yeah.
that really likes that movie. So like, whatever.
Now, we are telling the story in chronological order, and we left off in 1933. Earlier, we did 2 episodes set in parallel, one in 1920s Germany and one about the 1920s Russian avant-garde. Both of those episodes are going to lead directly into what we're talking about today, and our story begins with this man, Maxim Gorky.
Homie does not look. Homie looks a little dysgenic. I'm gonna be honest.
This guy, he's gone to every theater camp.
Yeah.
Gorky spent most of the 1920s living in exile in Mussolini's Italy. He had been against Russia's participation in World War I, and he was, broadly speaking, a communist. But in Gorky's case, that just meant that he supported the existence of an international cosmopolitan European culture. I don't think he cared so much about the ideology.
Mm.
That was just the extension of a 19th century debate in Russia that was still ongoing at this point between the Westernizers and the Slavophiles. The Westernizers wanted Russia to adopt European ideas and European technology to overcome Russia's, let's say, perceived backwardness, maybe not so perceived. The Slavophiles, on the other hand, they supported the Tsar and the Orthodox Church, and they had a certain mysticism about their ideology. Basically, they wanted Russia to be Russia, for better and for worse. Probably more worse.
What a crazy thing to want.
Well,
I don't need toilet, comrade.
That debate is still going on today with like Dugin and Putin.
Yep. Well, you got the Muscovy, and then you've got everybody else that's going to shit outside for their whole life. Yep. There's 2 Russias, so anyway.
Well, Gorky, he was one of the more high-profile Westernizers, and to be clear, the Westernizer-Slavophile debate is just one iteration of a centuries-old cycle where the battle lines often had a somewhat, shall we say, Semitic flavor.
Oh my.
Stalin took over in the late 20s and kicked out Trotsky, and this is often framed in ideological or political terms. But if you read contemporary accounts by people like Eugene Lyons, it was clearly just another example of the traditionalist Russians deciding that they'd had enough of a certain ethno-religious group that Trotsky belonged to.
So it's like Afghanistan, where the Pashtuns are the Taliban and the Tajiks are ISIS now.
Yep. Yeah,
it's
basically.
Just an old tribal conflict that's with new paint on it. All right.
Yeah, Stalin decided he'd had enough of, let's call them international interests. And he decided to deal with them in the way that Russians tend to deal with such things.
Not much subtlety.
So Gorky nominally supported communism insofar as he was a Westernizer, but he was suspicious of Bolshevism from day one. He had one handicap that prevented him from ever becoming a true believer in communism, and that's that he was a self-made man who was born a Gopnik.
Ooh.
He said that any political movement that is meant to embody the virtues of the Russian working class is going to end in barbarism.
You can't lie to a Gopnik about Gopniks. You can't.
Yeah.
They know Gopniks.
Yeah, at one point he said, I know the carpenters, stevedores, and bricklayers in a way that Lenin does not know. He disagreed with the Bolsheviks, quote, notions that Russian workers are the incarnation of spiritual beauty and kindness.
Wow. Okay, to put things in perspective, guys, a lot of young Russian men had to flee the country recently, and a good number of them went to Thailand, and there's changed the bar culture, and there's stabbings now.
Yeah.
So
Not exactly like spiritual beauty and kindness.
it's not, when I deal with a Gopnik, that's not the scariest thing I could be was like a working class Russian. If I
Yep.
that was the scariest thing I could claim in.
So, yeah, Gorky, he wasn't opposed to the Russian Revolution per se, but he was immediately critical of Lenin and Trotsky getting drunk on power.
That's dangerous in a bureaucracy like this.
Now, we all know about the Holodomor in 1932. What's less well known is that there was actually a first famine during the Russian Civil War in 1921 that killed 5 million people. It's the other Russian famine.
Yeah.
Gorky wrote a piece appealing to the outside world for financial aid. Then Gorky proposed and later joined an organization called the Pomgal, which is short for starvation relief in Russian.
We are the world.
Now, Gorky moved to Italy for health reasons that winter because he had contracted tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
And in a twist of fate, fitting of a Russian novelist, it turned out to be the luckiest instance of tuberculosis ever because the next year the Bolsheviks arrested most members of the Pomgal for counter-revolutionary activities. And Gorky decided, you know what, I'm just going to remain in Italy as a dissident.
Yep. Smart guy.
Yeah, the post-1945 narrative portrays this period in black and white terms with a clean division between the free countries and the totalitarian regimes. But we're already seeing shades of gray because when the first really high-profile Russian dissident fled, he sought freedom in fascist Italy.
Yeah, I can see that being a narrative issue.
We see another shade of gray when Gorky was convinced to return to the Soviet Union in 1931 after Lenin had died and Stalin had completely gotten rid of Trotsky and Trotsky's associates. Let's call them associates. Convincing Gorky to return was a huge propaganda victory for Stalin, but as always, the real reason is a lot more anodyne. Gorky had sold a few books while he was abroad in Italy, but he was in his mid-60s and past his prime at this point and not really selling anything anymore. By returning to Russia as a high-ranking member of the party, he could sell his books in bulk to the only distributor who was allowed to sell literature in a communist country.
I guess if you know the guy, you know the literature guy.
Well, so a modern Western equivalent would be Margaret Atwood.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, nobody would have ever bought Margaret Atwood's Swill on their own in the 90s, but every school board and university bookstore was forced to buy Margaret Atwood's shit in bulk.
Yep.
In my generation, the millennials, being cultured means that you've read The Handmaid's Tale in high school and you have a bookshelf full of the Harry Potter special edition and a little bit of young adult smut. Gorky just decided he was going to get in on that racket in his old age.
Can't hold it against him.
Yeah, he just had to make certain ethical compromises, like editing the official historical record of the construction of the White Sea Canal. He claimed that no workers were killed.
Wow.
A fact that would be disputed by Alexander Solzhenitsyn a few decades later.
Yep.
In another inconvenient shade of gray about the interwar period, Gorky famously said that if you want to get rid of fascism, you just need to exterminate all homosexuals.
I mean, he's not wrong, but who's going to drive urban real estate?
This is sometimes, albeit very tenuously, cited as the reason why the Soviet Union outlawed homosexuality in the mid-1930s. Probably not true, probably apocryphal, but I choose to believe it.
We know how Borat felt about this.
Now, as far as art and propaganda were concerned in the Soviet Union, constructivism was already being phased out in 1923 when Lenin was still alive. While the Russian Civil War was going on, Lenin and Trotsky were too busy to manage the country's propaganda. So while their backs were turned, official state propaganda could look like this.
Oh, that hurts my freaking soul looking at this.
Yeah, the guy who did this, his name was El Lissitzky. He thought it would be great to have a more cerebral type of propaganda for the revolution. After the Civil War was finished and they had to get down to the business of running the country, they said, no, no more.
So this doesn't work as propaganda because there's no primary stimulus.
No.
You need to pair something beautiful with what you want, or something that causes a reaction.
Yeah, well,
innately.
This is supposed to be symbolic of the Civil War, where the red wedge is piercing the white circle. It's the reds beating the whites. I just don't see it there.
I would never in a million years have come up with that on my own.
Yeah, this is something a teacher's pet would have made, accompanied by an essay about what it represents. But with the Civil War finished and the whites vanquished, Lenin and Trotsky could now focus on the business of running a country, and the Gopniks were not exactly responsive to this. Also, the country was bankrupt and in debt after the Revolution and the Civil War, so in 1921 they implemented the new economic policy, which was basically bringing back capitalism in a free market, at least until they paid off those debts.
Like the Chinese special economic zones.
You had a new cohort of nouveau riche types called the netmen, NEP standing for New Economic Policy, the netmen. And none of the netmen really wanted to spend their money on this experimental constructivist shit. But, it was still the 1920s, so art and literature maintained a somewhat modernist quality. Here are some examples. Like this is by Dinica. It's the construction of new workshops and the defense of Petrograd. You can see the modernist aesthetic here. This does not look like traditional Russian painting.
Yeah, the ladies look like ogre, like that one.
Yep.
Proportioned like that other painting.
Well, you also see like the steel girders and everything, the steel bars. Modernism wanted to be conscious of the world it inhabited in the 1920s. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, we literally did like 20 hours worth of content on the 20s. Go back and watch some of that.
You want to talk about a deep dive.
But, Russia was Russia, and the NEP was chronically unable to provide enough grain for its factory workers. Between 1925 and 1928, Stalin managed to maneuver himself into power, banish Trotsky, and assume virtually dictatorial powers. And in 1928, he said, all right, we're just going to use any means necessary to industrialize the country now, no matter how brutal it is. And so began the 5-year plan.
Couldn't we just look at what Japan did? Gulag with him.
If you're lucky.
First rape, then gulag.
Yeah. Also, if you're lucky.
Oh, yeah.
Contemporary accounts describe forced industrialization like an invading army, which is basically what it was. The precursor to the KGB would come in, force the kulaks off their land, shove them into factories, and they would be watched by an OGPU apparatchik, who was usually stationed on site, and who also had the authority to make you disappear if you complained. I'm sure your grandparents knew a thing or two about that.
I was just about to say, that's Tito's story.
Yep. Now, up to this point, nobody could ever really define what communism or socialism was, but they all agreed it was internationalist. Stalin just dropped the Internationalist Act and called it socialism in one country. He's like, yeah, fuck the revolution. It took all of 10 years for him to say, you know what? Instead of the international revolution that we just brutally murdered the Tsar and his family over, you know what? We're just going to focus on torturing the Gopniks.
Russia first.
Make Russia great again. So at this point, we see something in common between the period's three most notorious dictators. Mussolini was a Marxist, but he realized that he could get farther with his political aspirations by leaning into nationalism. Hitler headed up a party literally called the National Socialists. Stalin abandoned the pretense of in the international resolution and touted socialism in one country. It turns out that with all of these academic theories about internationalism and the international revolution, you can't just dissolve national identities, which is why I think even today the most ardent supporters of academic theories all seem to hate the idea of nationalism.
Yeah, it's weird. Like you remember when the Canadian flag
Hmm.
was considered like a fascist symbol for a little bit.
Yep.
Our prime minister was crying about it at the time.
Now, there is a nice, rich corpus of contemporary accounts about what happened to peasants unfortunate enough to experience Stalin's first 5 year plan. But Western intellectuals don't like to talk about this period in history. It's extremely inconvenient that prestige American publications like the New Republic and the Nation could never be convinced to say a bad word about the glorious utopian experiment going on in Russia, even during the winter of 1932 to 1933, which is now known to history as the Holodomor.
Didn't they have like homie come over and be like, I don't see any
Yeah,
I don't see
yeah,
any
that was
starving people.
Walter Duranty. Yes. So, other than the Holodomor, two things happened in 1932 that are relevant to our story. The first is the Ryutin affair, which has been called the original conspiracy theory. Stalin consolidated his power in the late 20s, but up until 1932, party members had the quaint idea that they could still criticize Stalin in public.
It's like those poor guys who she disappeared.
Yeah. Well, do you see the previous leader of China getting marched out of the party's AGM or Congress, whatever they call it?
Like big North Korea now. Sorry, Hong Kong.
Even better than best Korea.
Yep.
Yeah, 1932 was the year that Stalin decided to put an end to that little annoyance of being criticized publicly. Now, the backstory goes all the way back to 1923 when Lenin had his stroke. Stalin maneuvered himself into a de facto ruling triumvirate with Lev Kamenev and Gregory Zinoviev. These three were able to isolate Trotsky for being too focused on spreading the revolution worldwide and not paying enough attention to Russia.
Make communism great again, comrade. Focus on home front.
The whole point was that communism was supposed to be international, but Stalin's, yeah, fuck it.
Like the new Syrian guy with the global jihad.
Yep.
You saw the light there.
The Stalin Kamenev Zinoviev triumvirate, it basically broke down in 1925. That was when Stalin consolidated his power in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. But there was still the pesky matter of the Comintern, which was at least nominally an international organization, even though Moscow would send out the party line and every other communist worldwide would have to follow it if he didn't want to be kicked out of the club.
Like now with the progressives.
Yep. So after allying with Stalin to kick out Trotsky, Zinoviev and Kamenev then allied with Trotsky in the Comintern as a way to try to get power back from Stalin. But by 1928, Stalin basically took complete control of the Comintern as well by aligning himself with Nikolai Bukharin, though Bukharin did try to remain on good terms with Kamenev, and that is going to come back to bite him in the ass later on. So, as Stalin maneuvered himself to the top, he would frame Soviet politics as three factions. There were the followers of Trotsky, who we called the left deviationists, the followers of Bukharin, who were the right deviationists, and I, Joseph Stalin, am the reasonable man in the center.
I am by definition reasonable now.
Yeah. And if you don't like it,
This Siberia is very big place, comrade.
yeah, so left deviation, right deviation, whatever, dissent in the party was still allowed somewhat, at least until 1932. In June of that year, that's when a right deviationist named Martemyan Rayutin wrote two documents. First, there was a 200-page essay titled Stalin and the Crisis of the Proletarian Dictatorship. That's where he said the 5-year plan should be loosened, forced collectivization really needs to end, and we need to bring back the expelled party members. Yeah. If that wasn't bad enough, he also wrote a pamphlet titled An Appeal to All Members of the Communist Party, where he called for Stalin's removal by force if necessary.
I'm sure all my Russian brothers will be very reasonable.
Well, as I said, this was the absolute last time a party member criticized Stalin publicly. Because 3 months later, a group of party bigwigs, including Lenin's sister, met to release a report saying that the followers of Ryutin were degenerates, enemies of communism, traitors to the proletariat, and trying to form a, quote, underground bourgeois and kulak network to restore capitalism in general and the kulaks in specific. So that was the last straw for being able to criticize Stalin in public. You were too nice to the kulaks. You were too nice to Glupnik.
But it's just like they came in, and then the top 10% of the farmers basically they got rid of, like anyone who was good at their job.
Yep.
And then famine.
Yep.
Like,
And to be very clear, I think we mentioned this last time. Even with the famine, Stalin could have imported grain from Canada or Argentina or any other number of large breadbasket countries. But when you're trying to run a country in the name of the people and there's a large faction of people who don't like you, it's politically convenient to
have them all
make them
starve.
slightly less alive. So,
but Comrade Stalin, we can import grain. Why? Because famine. So I don't follow. The Ukrainians will die. Yes.
yeah, so Ryutin, he was given 10 years in the Gulag, and Zinoviev and Kamenev were internally exiled to Siberia, at least for now. We'll come back to this in the next episode when we look at the Great Purge, because that is going to have, let's say, a material effect on the art scene in the Soviet Union.
In Asiatic Russia, is it like the Great Migration? Is that how they teach it? Like, because literally they'd like sometimes like Stalin would just want like a town doing a certain thing, and they would just stop the train and kick however many people off and say figure out mining. Like,
This is what happens when you try to take Western utopianism, thought up by a bunch of like 130 IQ Western Europeans whose friends are all industrialists, and try to impose that on Russia.
such ideals do not last in Siberia, comrade.
What ideals? In the ideals.
In Siberia, nothing lasts. It's winter. Only thing that lasts. Have you seen natives to Siberia? These are animal men. This is what Siberia do to you.
Like I said, we'll come back to this in the next episode when we talk about the Great Purge, but more germane to our discussion of art history is the fact that this moment in 1932 was the exact moment that Stalin decided to just drop the pretense of even trying to govern in the name of the people.
Like Putin in 2022.
Yep. Well, that includes dictating culture from the top down. A lot of the avant-garde artists and propagandists from the 1920s are about to have a really bad time.
Ooh.
And that brings us to the second thing that happened in 1932. And that's that Stalin made an executive decision that all this modernist shit that you see on the screen here, it's just done. In April of 1932, The Central Committee released a decree that it needed to get rid of all the quote alien elements in Russian literature, particularly those introduced during the NEP, but also that the Soviet Union had so many creatives and artists that we now need one organization for them to all belong to. And that meant liquidating the various creative associations, specifically naming the Association of Proletarian Writers, who had some ideas that Stalin didn't always approve of.
No, all the talented writers are kulaks.
At least at first, it's going to be so that we can keep our eye on them. But yeah, the Great Purge comes 5 years later, and yes.
This will improve literature. We kill anyone with talent.
Well, in our episode on 20s Russian art, we mentioned the AKHRR, or the Association of Artists of Revolutionary Russia. The AKHRR would be liquidated the next year as well. From this point onwards, all art, all literature, and all culture in the Soviet Union was going to be on the same page or else. And what page was that? Well, later that year, in October of 1932, there was a secretive meeting of Russian writers. According to contemporary accounts, it was like spy movie level shit. Writers would get a mysterious phone call with instructions to be at a specific street corner at a specific time and waiting for top secret party instructions.
Now, this is also how they sent you to the gulag.
Yeah, I know. Yep, that it was. I'm sure there were a lot of sweaty palms this night.
And sometimes they tell you, "Oh, I'm going to send you on vacation, comrade. Be here at certain time. You go on great vacation."
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of these writers thought they were about to get blackbagged.
Oh yeah.
But it wasn't the gulag that awaited. Eventually, sometimes after 2 or 3 stops, they ended up at the apartment of our good friend Maxim Gorky, and Stalin happened to be in attendance.
I love how, like, for once in Russia, it's not the gulag and it's a meeting with Stalin.
Well, at Gorky's apartment, Stalin announced that all Soviet writing was going to be on the same page going forward. So just picture the scene. It's the middle of the night in a cramped apartment full of all of Moscow's best writers and men of letters, coming down off what I'm sure is a huge adrenaline crash, assuming they weren't all drunk on vodka, which they probably were.
Oh yeah, definitely. These are Russian creatives who
But
think they're going to their death.
But-
They're drunk.
this is like a character in all of my novels. I'm going to die and be fatalistic about it. Yeah, they're listening to Stalin say that all culture going forward was going to be in lockstep. And it's going to be in lockstep around one concept. That concept is called socialist realism. Now, at this point, nobody knew exactly what socialist realism was going to be, least of all Stalin himself. The writers just knew that if they didn't get with the program, they were going to be in deep shit. And for the next 2 years, whatever socialist realism was, they were making it up as they went along, but everybody knew they had to go along with it. Often, socialist realism, the ideas and theories came in the form of Stalin taking credit for other people's older ideas. For example, this man is Sergei Tretyakov. Now, in the early 20s, in the years immediately following the revolution, when the avant garde was still in vogue, Tretyakov talked about how this futurist and constructivist shit had to be used to remake society, saying, the art worker must stand beside the man of science as a psycho-engineer and psycho-constructor.
So you're not doing art, you're some kind of social engineer.
Basically, yes.
Oh God. That's how you end up with fat women in Star Wars.
Well, like I said, it only lasted for a couple of years while Lenin and Trotsky were busy fighting the Russian Civil War. When they had to get serious about propagandizing the Gopniks, all this stuff went away really quickly.
The peasants will not die for this, comrade.
Basically, Tretyakov was saying that all art going forward had to be about the revolution so that people couldn't think about anything but the revolution.
What a nightmare.
Yeah, fast forward to the mid-30s, Stalin is basically ripping off this guy's ideas word for word. saying that socialist realist writers had to be engineers of human souls. Now, when Stalin is plagiarizing you, it's inconvenient for Stalin if you're still around.
If you still, it would be much better if you did not exist.
Yeah, so Tretyakov, he was swept up during the Great Purge, and in 1937 he was told to face the wall. And because Russians can't resist the urge for one last act of sadism, at this particular prison, they took pictures of every prisoner right before he was shot. Here is Tretyakhov's prison picture. Like within 60 seconds of this picture being taken, this guy was dead.
Wow, very stoic. But he's been through the ringer.
Yep. Again, he's stoic because he's a Russian writer.
Yep.
And what are Russian novels about other than yes, I die?
Yep, and and again, the history of them. They have a real problem with self-deletion. The Russian creatives, and yeah, I guess
And alcoholism.
and alcoholism. And I'm guessing this guy was just like, "You are saving me the trouble," as a Russian writer.
So one of our ongoing themes is that our industrial world was set up around the time of World War One, and everything in our culture is just a rehash of something from the 1910s or 1920s. The paintings we've been looking at are every bit as much of an echo of the 1920s as the ugliest contemporary art installation. While art has always had a certain element of propaganda to it, never before did art have to get the masses on board with a large bureaucratic system. And Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia were both run by large integrated bureaucratic structures that required buy in from the people. In the 1910s and 1920s, the futurists, the Dadaists, and the constructivists, they all glorified the machines. If you don't remember, here's some of the stuff we looked at in previous episodes. This is futurism, showing motion and showing the machines, in this case, a bicycle.
Okay.
This was the Brooklyn Bridge by Robert Stella. Again, you see cubism here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's celebrating the new industrialization of the early 20th century.
Wow.
We also looked at this one. This is Raoul Hausmann's Totlin at Home. Totlin was an inbred, retarded-looking Gopnik, not this guy you see with his brain replaced by a computer, but go figure. Haussmann was a Dadaist who believed that after World War One, we were going to replace society with computers and equations that were going to stop us from making the same mistake again. I got to tell you, now that I live in a society where everything is digitized and computerized, what do we get? Every customer service line takes you to the same call center in India.
Well, and like, advertisements like fine-tuned now.
Yeah. Yeah, I get
Like
this is not a utopia.
it's messed up how specific my ads are.
Yeah.
In my various feeds, like.
Well, 1930s Soviet art, on the other hand, it still glorified the machine, but it glorified the machine in a very different way. It was meant to be churned out by a mechanistic process, and it was supposed to almost praise that mechanistic process. The cultural machine would employ the country's most talented creatives, and it was supposedly going to produce the best aesthetics that humanity had ever seen under the banner of socialist realism.
So like AI now.
Yes.
Okay.
For all the talk of preserving older aesthetics, which were really just late 19th century aesthetics, the cultural machine is a 20th century idea, every bit as much as Le Corbusier's concrete slab worker housing cubes. In the 30s, that's when you see the last real gasp of utopian thinking. Something that has never been tried, but it was just going to work out, not just in concept, but at scale. And why was it going to work out? Because the smartest people had thought it out, and that's enough to make anything work, right?
Yeah. Like the response to the big cough. That was all our best people.
Yep. Yeah, too soon.
Yeah.
These aren't modern bureaucrats happy to use the art world as a money laundering scheme. In 1933, there was genuine belief that if you laid down the process for mass producing art, you would get loads of great art, even if you were vague on the details, at least at first.
Mm.
And you see that in Nazi Germany as well, as we'll soon see. Hitler also believed that you would make the world's best art by organizing it as a process.
Yeah, King Kim Jong Il wrote a book about that. It had lines in it like the director is the dictator of the opera.
So in Russia, following the decree of 1932, all of the pre-existing bodies of Soviet literature had been liquidated and reorganized into one single body, the Union of Soviet Writers, which was headed up by Maxim Gorky. Now, at this time, Gorky is 65 and in failing health, so he's the perfect figurehead who isn't going to argue against anything. It's like, the Pope when he's old and senile, they just prop him up. That was Gorky. So in 1934, the first All Union Congress of Soviet Writers is held, and that's where socialist realism is finally formalized into a set of principles that really lasted until the Soviet Union fell in 1991. And who was going to be in charge of it? This man here, Andrei Zhdanov.
Oh God. This guy should be like drinking at like a polka festival in Wisconsin.
Well, also, like every creative arts university program, whether it's theater, whether it's fine arts, whether it's anything, has like a 5'7" douchebag who looks exactly like this guy.
You know who else he looks like? John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah, he does. But he had a little bit less of a sense of humor. This man is Andrei Zhdanov. He is the secretary of the Central Committee responsible for ideology. Now, this guy is exactly the kind of guy you would expect to be in charge of Soviet propaganda. The Zhdanov doctrine was, broadly speaking, you are going to be on message or you're going to end up in Gulag. Two
Oh, good.
choices. So, if you've ever worked for a large corporation, you've seen a yes man who doesn't seem to have much talent, but who just gets promoted by making the right maneuvers while upper management is getting the axe.
There's just some people that like the people aren't threatened by.
Yeah, that's Zhdanov. Well, a lot of low level people are threatened by this guy. He is not just some opinionated critic. He ends up with the power to point at you and make you disappear because he is the definition of the guy who fails up in a bureaucracy.
He's the Rob Ford.
Yeah, when it comes to being in the right place at the right time, fortune smiled upon this man here, Andrei Zhdanov. He was promoted to the Central Committee in early 1934 at the end of the 17th Annual Congress of the Soviet Union. At that Congress, the subject came up about the succession of Comrade Stalin because Stalin was starting to experience some cardiovascular issues. The consensus choice was a man named Sergei Kirov, who was popular enough to receive an even bigger applause than Stalin himself.
Ooh.
Later that year, in December 1934, Kirov was mysteriously assassinated. The official story is that the gunman was a lone assassin named Leonid Nikolaev, but the official story has a very unreliable narrator. And whatever the truth was, it was a great origin story for the Moscow trials and the Great Purges a couple years later. It also provided exactly the ammunition that Stalin needed to tie up all the loose ends after the Ryutin affair that we just mentioned, which is why the Ryutin affair is sometimes referred to as the last time anybody criticized Stalin in public. The 1934 Congress of the Soviet Union is sometimes called the Congress that condemned.
Oh wow.
Nikita Khrushchev is not the most reliable narrator, but he gave a speech in 1956 saying that 1,108 out of 1,966 delegates and 98 out of the 139 members of the Central Committee were purged.
Wow.
If you cheered for Comrade Kirov being Stalin's successor, you must have been complicit in his assassination because he was standing in the way of your ambition.
Wow. Yep. That's
So,
Russian crazy logic.
so it was not exactly a good position to be on the Central Committee in 1935, unless your name was Andrei Zhdanov, because this was just fortune smiling upon him.
So it's like whoever's running Iran right now.
Well, yeah, he was a relative up and comer who had just been promoted to the Central Committee, so he had plausible deniability. And the most relevant thing to our story is that a few months after rising to the position of chief propagandist in April 1934, Zhdanov was given Kirov's position.
Hmm.
A few months later, in March 1935, he was able to make his bones by playing a role in the deportations of the Leningrad aristocrats, more than 11,000 people who were middle class or higher before the revolution. In case the subtlety is lost, the NKVD referred to this as Operation Former People. From 1934 onwards, this was the guy tasked with making sure that Soviet art adhered to the principles of socialist realism. So artists had a pretty strong incentive not to deviate.
Yeah, yeah. Can you imagine being subordinate to this guy?
Yeah.
Oh God.
I can't imagine this guy being a middle manager
No.
who's above me.
No, this guy should.
So, what exactly was socialist realism? When announcing the principles at the 1934 Congress, Zhdanov described them in a speech. Strictly speaking, he was only talking about writing and literature, not painting, but the point was loud and clear. This is a translated quote. You must know life in order to depict it faithfully in artistic reproductions, to depict it not scholastically, not simply as objective fact, but to depict reality in its revolutionary development. So even at this point, you see the exact kind of rhetoric that is repeated by people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she talks
Yeah.
about people being more concerned with being factually correct than morally right.
Yep.
Zhdanov continues, the faithfulness and the historical concreteness of the artistic depiction must be combined with the task of the ideological refashioning and education of laboring people in the spirit of socialism. Such a method of artistic literature and literary criticism is what we call the method of socialist realism. I don't know what the fuck it means. I just know that I don't want to run afoul of this guy.
He's like the one really unfun arts prof.
Yeah. He's also the total mediocrity who's going to get rid of
Yeah.
anybody who makes him look bad.
Yep. And it's not hard to make this guy look bad. This guy Paul Blart of communism over here.
Well, in practical terms, first and foremost, socialist realism established the cult of Stalin. The 1934 Congress of Soviet Writers was, if nothing else, a series of exaltations to Stalin. He was praised as the architect of this new artistic movement that was going to transform all of world culture. But it didn't just establish the cult of Stalin. In many ways, it established the cult of Lenin as well. Lenin was already dead at this point, but I want you to try to think of a picture of Lenin where he's not striking a monumental pose. I can't
Can't
do it.
can't do it.
Every picture of Lenin you can think of looks like this.
Yeah. Yeah, the hand in pocket, everything. Yeah. I can't picture the guy without that.
Yeah, well, this image comes out of the socialist realism age from 1934 onwards. When I say that this was the most effective way of propagandizing the masses in the 30s before television became the propagandist medium of choice, this is what I mean. We can laugh at the absurdity of an oppressive society full of posters of Big Brother, but if you had met V.I. Lenin in the flesh, he probably would have had the demeanor very differently than the one in your head.
Yeah, I can see that.
So there is something to be said about this kind of work as effective propaganda, at least in this period. In
The
fact, Lenin didn't pose for any of this propaganda in his lifetime. He certainly wanted to build monuments to the heroes of the revolution, but he did not want to self aggrandize. It just wasn't his personality. But as soon as he died in 1924, his body was made visible for viewing. Then in 1930, they built a marble mausoleum in Red Square to put his embalmed body on permanent display. So, you started to see this monumental image applied to Lenin. But it wasn't until the rise of socialist realism in the mid 30s that the image of Lenin really came into being. Uh, it never ended up being built, but plans were made for a Palace of Soviets that was meant to be the tallest building in the world, topped by a statue of Lenin. Like, look at this thing.
Holy God.
Yeah.
This is like L. Ron Hubbard would call this Vince McMahon would call this ostentatious.
I'm sure at least one person ended up in the gulag for mentioning that on a cloudy day you wouldn't be able to see Lenin. So that's the cult of Lenin. It comes about after Lenin's dead. It's one thing to project opinions onto a dead guy, but as far as the cult of Stalin goes, you know, the propaganda of Stalin served basically the same purpose as the propaganda of Lenin. We all know Stalin was a ruthless leader who made his political enemies disappear without the least bit of guilt on his conscience, but that describes a lot of Russian leaders.
All of them.
I want you to really think. Can you describe Stalin's personality in a way that doesn't appeal to either a painting like this or a cartoonish story that borders on a fairy tale?
No.
Yeah, we know all the things Stalin did, especially when it involved, torturing the Gopniks. But do we really know the kind of guy that Stalin was at parties or even in official meetings? Like that's the thing about this kind of artwork. It becomes a blank slate that we can project anything onto.
Yeah. It makes sense. Good propaganda.
Yep. Let's look at a few more portraits. He was a leader in an abstract sense in these images.
It's another very Aryan baby.
Yep. Yeah, I think the name of that was Stalin's cares illuminate the future of our children, which again sounds like the title of the Borat movie.
yes, it does.
In these portraits, Stalin is just the avatar of a leader within the story that communism is trying to tell. He's not a person.
Yeah. No, he's a character in a moral drama. Yeah, it's like freaking Stations of the Cross.
Well, but like I said, because we don't know the kind of man that Stalin was at parties, these paintings allow us to project anything onto him, especially if we're told to project a certain image onto him.
Yeah, this is the same thing that like teen stars do.
Yep.
Like,
Well, at least before they got on social media and
that's
we
fair.
realized how stupid they all
Yeah,
were.
that's fair.
Uh, this is especially true of Stalin because he rose through the ranks of the party away from the spotlight. So there really was not much of a historical record of the kind of man he was in the early days.
Yeah, he's like a bank robber. Like it's a mythos. It's
Yep.
like
Oh,
it's weird.
exactly.
He was a priest. He was a bank robber. He was a blah.
Yeah. Well, official paintings of Stalin are as much Rorschach test as they are art.
Literally changed his name to Man of Steel.
A second theme of this kind of painting and this kind of propaganda is that the leader was a hero, especially in war. Like again, going back to Lenin, this is Gerasimov's Lenin on the Tribune, painted in 1930.
Looks like he's standing on a barricade.
Arguably, this created the image of Lenin that you have in your head, and I have in
Yeah.
my head, and everybody has in his head. More generally, the leader would be shown rallying the troops or leading the charge or making a key decision. The battle was usually from the Russian Civil War or later on from World War II. Even though Stalin never went anywhere near the front, he appeared in every one of these war paintings.
Oh, can you imagine?
Uh, Another common theme you would see is the image of the dear leader as the wise man. Here is Boris Jorgensen's Vladimir Lenin holds a speech at the Third Congress of the RKSM, i.e., the Komsomol.
This is something. There's something about a group meeting that is very, very primal to people.
Well, especially people who wanted to join the Komsomol.
Mm,
If you wanted to get a job in the bureaucracy, if you wanted a useless government make work job,
I want to be a beetle man.
you would join the Komsomol, the Young Communist League. By proving that you could stand the bullshit of the Komsomol, you were the ideal candidate to be a useless government bureaucrat.
Oh, it's like a frat now. Okay.
Or any university now,
Yeah, fair.
any liberal arts degree now.
Yep.
What is the modern liberal arts degree but ideological compliance training for a government job?
Yeah.
Membership in the Komsomol greatly increased during the 5-year plan when becoming a bureaucrat was a very nice looking option compared to starving in the Holodomor. But this painting is one of the more famous examples of socialist realist painting, where Lenin is the wise teacher to the Komsomol, who are clearly supposed to be the smart kids in the class. Like I said, there's a lot of eerie similarities between the Komsomol and the modern university system. This is exactly the kind of messaging that would resonate today with the fat millennial wine aunt with a house full of cats and a degree in equity studies.
Oh yeah.
The kind of woman who reminisces about being labeled gifted at age 10.
Oh God.
That's who this is trying to propagandize.
Yeah. Okay. The beetle people.
And finally, you had the leader being the friend of the happy masses. Like, we've all seen paintings like this where Stalin is gracing the masses with his warm presence and everyone is smiling.
See, everyone happy. Does not have to be food on table.
I don't think a single thing in this painting is truthful, but does that matter? Press conferences and the 6 o'clock news didn't yet exist. You didn't need to look good for television.
Yeah.
You can project whatever you want onto this thing, even if it's the idea that Stalin is a ruthless liar.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about these portraits of the leader. If you look at portraits of Hitler, you see all the same conventions.
Yeah.
Like, look at this. And if you look at portraits of Mussolini, especially later on in Mussolini's career, you see the same thing.
A lot of hand gesturing.
And if you look at pictures of Mao Zedong, same thing. This goes back to what I was saying about mass media being a new thing in the 20th century, when people were still figuring out the best propaganda techniques through trial and error. When one government figured out the best way to propagandize lots of people, you tended to see every other government using the exact same tactics. It's to the point where when Saddam Hussein came to power in the 80s, he did the same thing as well, albeit with much less artistic quality. This one's even worse.
Yeah, this is
Look at
clearly
this.
he had a smaller talent pool after his
This was
purges.
done on like plywood and not
Yeah.
canvas.
Yep. You use what you got. Oh, is that Al-Aqsa? He's right.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's great.
The problem is that television was established when Saddam rose to power,
Mm,
and this was no longer the best way to propagandize people.
yep.
The big missile in the background. I'm sure it resonates with a few people in the Arab world, but your image of Saddam Hussein does not come from the painting on the side of a building. It comes from video footage that aired on CNN where he was usually wearing a military uniform and giving a speech.
And when they paraded him around after they pulled him out of the hole, and
Yep.
then when they hung him and put the video on the internet.
Yep. You don't win that propaganda battle by having better paintings.
Yeah.
You win that propaganda battle by realizing that YouTube is a new medium and having a video of his final moments spread across the internet as soon as
Yep.
it was possible.
The same day.
Yep.
But yeah, so it's like bringing a knife to a gunfight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Saddam was clearly trying to send the message that he was following Stalin's playbook, right down to a few quite well-publicized purges and confessions.
His mustache was actually a tribute to Stalin. Stalin was his hero.
Yep. If you want, Google the day that he addressed his parliament and told 75 people to go out back.
And shoot the other half of the people.
Yep.
That's on camera, that whole thing. So you can watch that now. Imagine if you could watch Stalin's purges.
Part of this art was a pastiche of Stalin's aesthetics, even though Islam is so opposed to representational art that most Arab art is just calligraphy and decoration.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
He wanted to be Stalin so badly that he basically did something that was haram.
Yep.
The other thing about Saddam's Iraqi propaganda was just how cheap it was. Like, the aesthetics here are much more Las Vegas than the Parthenon.
Yeah, this is like seedy strip club,
Like
painting, not like
I don't know
nice mansion painting.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the Victory Arch that commemorated victory in the Iran-Iraq War, but it was not exactly the Lincoln Memorial.
Oh, wow. Tell me you just fought a war of attrition without telling me you just fought a war of attrition.
The shanties in the background, which is perfect.
Yep. Those are marsh Arabs. If you're having a good day and you want to have a bad day, Google what he did to the marsh Arabs. Anyway, there used to be a big marsh. Used to be. It was drained. Now there's no more marsh Arabs.
No.
Sorry, marsh Arabs.
The cult of Stalin was the main feature of socialist realism, but more generally, socialist realism was supposed to be the final set of principles on which to judge a work of art or literature. From the 30s onwards, all books about art read like an instruction manual for the proper way to do Soviet portraiture, Soviet landscapes, the Soviet battle epic, etc., etc. And because it was the Soviet Union, everything had to be framed in communist or revolutionary terms, especially in terms of the all-important dialectic.
Oh, they love that.
Yeah, socialist realism is the rational antithesis to the decadent bourgeois culture. And because it's part of the dialectic, all art that came prior to socialist realism was not true art.
Wait. This is very familiar.
Yep. Yep. But since all art now had to be socialist realism, they outlawed criticism in a very Soviet way. They just closed down all the different art publications and consolidated them into one periodical called Iskutstvo, where it was only going to be possible to have one theory of art. And so a new word entered the Soviet lexicon, formalism. From this point onwards, the Soviets would use the word formalism basically to describe anything that they wanted to get rid of. If you say, wait a second, it's loosely defined and they can call anything formalism if they want to make it disappear. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So it's the problematic of its day.
Yes. And for that bourgeois, technically speaking, formalism was the avant-garde style of Soviet literature that developed in the post-revolutionary period, which emphasized structure and linguistics over content.
Also very familiar.
Mm-hmm. Socialist realism was going to throw out everything experimental from the 20s, and that included formalist literature. But the word was redefined to retroactively include the avant-garde art as well, including the futurists and the constructivists we looked at in our 20s Soviet Union episode. That's the problem with being a revolutionary. When the leader decides on the next stage of the revolution, you're going to be in the crosshairs.
Bad news, comrade. You are no longer convenient to me.
And we know you have the revolutionary tendencies, so get against the wall.
We have no more use for your people. I was telling the communist kids the other day, hey kids, you know what happens to the revolutionaries after the revolution, right? They're like, no. I'm like, look it up.
Yep. And that's exactly what happens when the word formalism is defined, or should I say loosely defined.
Yep.
From 1933 onwards, this new publication, Iskustvo, ran one article after another talking about how socialist realism needed to destroy formalism and that formalism was now apparently bourgeois.
Hmm.
Like, remember, formalism was supposed to be getting rid of the old bourgeois literature. It's very confusing.
It's just, this the march, the communist treadmill of
Progress.
freaking.
Yeah, and then of course, because everything after World War One is soaked in politics, now formalism becomes associated with fascism.
Oh crap!
You
This is
know the
also very familiar. You just call whoever fascist.
Yeah. Well, exactly. The avant-garde shit, the terrible stuff we looked at was literally the official art of the Soviet Union when the revolution was still fresh, and now it's fascist. Yeah, so remember that there was a decree in 1932 to liquidate all independent artistic groups and then consolidate them at a later date. That year, there was an exhibition in Leningrad titled 15 Years of Soviet Art, which proudly showed off the constructivist shit that we looked at in our 1920s Soviet art episode.
Hmm.
There was a whole section devoted to the revolutionary avant garde, but when that exhibition was moved to Moscow 6 months later, all of the avant garde stuff had been removed. And the only thing remaining was the figurative painting and sculpture that we're looking at today. There was an article in Escutzvo saying that the avant-garde stuff was made by institutions that no longer exist, so it's no longer worth wasting our time thinking about it.
Don't worry, Cobra.
In other words, we're only going to talk about history if we're talking about the garbage that is now being replaced by socialist realism.
Okay.
But my art was supposed to be revolutionary. Well, now it's garbage. So that's the first half of the story of totalitarian art in the 1930s. The other half happened at roughly the same time in 1933 because that's when Hitler rose to power.
I know this guy.
The Soviet Union had existed since 1917 and Italy had been fascist since 1922, but this is when Europe truly entered the totalitarian era. In Russia, socialist realism is based on the cult of Stalin and an official set of general principles, but those principles were somewhat loosely defined and constantly changing. You just knew that if you wanted to be an artist, you were going to practice socialist realism if you wanted to remain in Comrade Stalin's good graces. So, at least in the 30s, socialist realism was based on vibes. But you know what? For all the rhetoric about aesthetics, Nazism and Nazi art was just as vibes based for the first few years. Hitler gave a speech to the Reichstag in 1933 about purifying all aspects of Germany, including politics and culture. We mentioned that socialist realism preached that art was supposed to be churned out by a mechanistic process where all creatives were employed by the state, and the cultural mega machine was supposed to produce the best art possible. Hitler was absolutely no different in that regard. One of the first things he did as Führer was to lay the cornerstone of the new Haus der Kunst, or House of Art, in Munich.
It's a little bleak.
Well,
He's going for the Roman thing, I guess, but it's a little bleak.
when you think about the Nazi propaganda machine churning out paintings with its characteristic aesthetic, that never really got going until the House of Art, as you see here, was opened in 1937, 4 years into the Third Reich. And the country went to war 2 years later, which led to its downfall. So when you hear that most Nazi art was destroyed in the war, that's technically true, but it's misleading. Just based on the timeline, Nazi cultural artifacts just simply weren't produced over a very long period, so there weren't that many of them.
And God help anybody who has like a historical interest in collecting it.
Hmm.
They recently fired like a professional of some kind because he had one of Hitler's books. Like,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was
I
like
think
a
that was a
signed,
signed
yeah,
copy
it
of
was a
Mein Kampf.
signed copy of Mein Kampf. It was a historical primary source document. And there's,
It's not difficult to see what Hitler envisioned Nazi art becoming if it was going to be housed in a building like this. But because the Allied occupation was and probably is the last true occupation the world has seen, they didn't just smash the symbols of Hitler, they had to debase them, like Cortez smashing the Aztec temples.
No,
Um,
your God is dead.
yep. Well, they made sure that Nuremberg, the site of the rallies, was synonymous with post-war propaganda.
Mm,
And they also made sure that this building, Hitler's pride and joy, was going to be used for modern and contemporary art.
ooh, sorry, Uncle Adolf.
We are trying to get to the bottom of how art got ugly, and some people say there actually is true beauty in it. But you may come to some very uncomfortable answers when you realize that the people who firebombed Dresden are the people who wanted to make sure this building was full of contemporary art.
Yeah. And this goes, if you think this is irrelevant, guys, like our modern ruling class is obsessed with this weird art.
Hmm.
The thing that people don't talk about, I'm Clinton emails, yada yada yada. Yeah, spirit cooking. It's a weird postmodern art show that she does for like small groups. And they, for whatever reason, the ruling class takes it very seriously and actually seems to like it. If with the leaks, are any indication. And then if you think, oh, that's just a Democrat thing, they do a cremation of care in Bohemian Grove with a bunch of Republicans every year. So, and that, what's that? It's a pithy, weird stage show.
I lived in Washington D.C. for a couple of years in my mid 20s. When Pizzagate broke, and they talked about this,
Comet
pizza.
pizza.
Yeah, they talked about this pizza shop with all this really weird, perverted art in it. My response was, I lived in D.C. Are you sure this wasn't just purely coincidence that a pizza shop was full of weird, perverted art? You don't know the ruling class if you think that weird, perverted art couldn't just be chance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just the soup they swim in.
Hitler made it quite clear in his speeches and in Mein Kampf that he hated modernism, but his ideas were just vibes for the first 4 years. Things were truly formalized when the House of Art opened in 1937 and started hosting official art shows called the Great Exhibitions of German Art, which would truly bestow status. To get into those art shows, you had to follow these artistic standards, which were part of the more general Führerprinzip, or principles of the Führer, which said that the words of Adolf Hitler supersede any written laws. And for the
In
first art,
English, it's the leadership principle.
yep. So for the first art show in 1937, there were 15,000 artworks submitted, and a panel of experts was appointed to curate an exhibit, but the experts could not come up with a selection that satisfied Hitler. So, fuck it, I will take over the show myself.
The guy's about to invade Poland.
Yep,
This is what he's worried about.
yep,
This is the ruling class, guys.
yep.
This is like,
Well, the House of Art opened in July 1937 with a show unveiling the new official German art. A particular emphasis was given to sculptors like Arno Brecker, who did monumental works of both classical and modern subject matter, like this. You know,
I wonder why the gay Nazis like this.
yep. Hitler inaugurated the House of Art with a speech about how art had to be an expression of the Germans who were fighting to create the new era. As one might expect from the author of a book called My Struggle, he says that art needs to represent a new struggle for the Volk. He also says there are not going to be any more weird avant garde groups and that artists are going to work for the cultural machine if they want work at all. The speech contains the line, "The artist cannot stand aloof from his people." Now, to be fair, I'm I'm going to be fair with everybody, including Adolf Hitler. I can't say I disagree with his assessment that these aloof artists were vandals trying to tear down better and more talented artists.
A lot of my favorite art came out of the community. There's something to be said for an artist that has a job.
Yep. Hitler said that that nonsense was finished. From now on, fields are not going to be blue and the sky is not going to be green. If you paint blue fields because you think fields are blue, either you've experienced brain damage and you deserve pity, or else your brain is wired funny, in which case you need to be referred to the eugenics program. And if you don't actually think that the fields are blue, then you're trying to harass the German people and you need to be dealt with by the courts.
Oh, wow.
I look at the terrible art we see these days, and I'm not going to lie, that message resonates with me a little bit.
This is the advantage of having like a king or a pope that can just go, no, none of this. No, we're not doing that.
Now, the great exhibitions held at the House of Art were held annually after it opened in 1937, but again, the Third Reich just doesn't last that long after that. After the first exhibition, Hitler wanted to handpick all the pieces, but that turned out to be, logically infeasible because there were just too many paintings, and Hitler's standards were a little too strict. So professors had to make selections, but Hitler gave the following instructions. If some self-styled artist submits trash, he is a swindler who should go to prison, a madman who belongs in an asylum, or a degenerate who needs to be sent to a concentration camp to be taught the dignity of honest work.
When he's right, he's right. I'm not.
Yeah, I know. There's a reason that certain ethno-religious groups don't like the fact that AI allows younger kids to listen to Hitler's speeches in English. Because
That's
some of them
gonna.
are finding it a little bit resonant.
Yeah, there's gonna be some. This century's going a little bit too much like last century.
Mhm. Goebbels also banned all art criticism, saying that the public could make up its own mind whether a piece of art was ugly or not. Again, I can't disagree with that either.
Nah.
Yeah. What do they say? Beauty speaks for itself. Ugliness needs a lecture.
Yep. Well, and art critics are horrible.
Yep. Well, Goebbels also said that criticism was just a holdover from a time that Jews tried to convince you that an ugly piece of art actually had some intrinsic value that you were missing. No comment.
Yeah.
No comment because I don't want to get banned.
Not touching that one.
Unlike in the Soviet Union, which got rid of all the old institutions and academies and basically kept control by having a monopoly on all the raw art supplies, if you wanted to be an avant-garde artist under Stalin, good luck buying supplies.
Well, or potato.
Goebbels' ministry just brought all the existing cultural unions under its umbrella and made it illegal to do creative work unless you were working for one of these unions. From there, it was a quick step to kick out all the modernists, Jews, and other so-called degenerates, and to tell aspiring artists that they were never getting in if they were, quote, politically unreliable.
Wow.
Also, not any different than the modern art world, but just a little more explicit.
Yeah, that's fair.
But you got to remember one thing: the Nazis were in large part just copying the Soviets. There was one issue, though. The Bolsheviks could play on certain atavisms by doing epic paintings about defeating the Tsar or victories in the Russian Civil War or later on World War II. Those paintings were usually exaggerated, but such is the nature of propaganda. The Third Reich, militaristic as it was, didn't really have any recent victories to lean on. You can't really call back to World War I or portray it as glorious when your whole raison d'etre is undoing the humiliation that was placed on Germany because of that war. You can call back to the Bismarck age and the Franco-Prussian War, and Hitler certainly did. But that was the 1860s and early 1870s. The people who remembered those days were all in their late 70s at least. To tap into the same primal instincts, the Nazis really only had one option, and that was to, let's say, exaggerate the Munich Putsch of 1923. This is
We will do a beer hall pushed episode. It is too funny to not really lay it out, but yeah. Anyway, this is not how it happened.
No, it was not. Yeah, if you read accounts like the rise and fall of the Third Reich, this was not exactly a strong showing for the Brown team.
No, this was like closer to January 6th than like, in terms of a coup. Like this was just a comedy of errors.
Well, accounts differ on what exactly happened, but Hitler ran away.
Yeah, he fell to the ground and then he ran away.
He was not standing defiantly in front of a phalanx of stormtroopers.
Nope.
When the dust settled, Hitler and a few of his colleagues were thrown into Landberg prison, where he had a lot of time to think and, more importantly, to dictate Mein Kampf to Rudolf Hess.
Yep. Who I'm sure had nothing better to do. Look at that guy.
But the putsch played an outsized role in Nazi propaganda because Goebbels didn't have anything else to work with.
Yeah, it's just you gotta make.
There needed to be a symbol of Nazi bravery, and when you don't have a real one, just make one up.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of propaganda, there were a lot of parallels between socialist realism and 1930s Nazi art. For example, as the leader of the Writers' Union, Gorky was mentioned and praised almost as much as Stalin was at the 1934 Congress, but Gorky was half dead and being propped up. Gorky, probably under duress, gave a speech about how the 10 years leading up to the revolution, so 1907 to 1917, were an irresponsible time of creative freedom, which was used to just propagandize the Western bourgeoisie. Now, this was known as the Silver Age of Russian poetry, so Gorky wasn't just attacking his own Russian heritage, he was trying to bury the modernism which characterized the 20 years from about 1907 to 1927.
Oh, like the Chinese getting rid of the treasure ships because
Yep.
it was like the old generals or the old dynasty that did them. Okay.
Yep. In Germany, Hitler had a similar timeline when he was describing the artistic crisis that he wanted to solve. In Hitler's Table Talks, he had a monologue about German art being great in 1910, but since then, subversives and decadents had tried to foist things on Germany, quote, under the pretext of artistic experiment.
This also sounds familiar.
In 1935, he said that art is not the expression of capitalistic tendency, and that art had to be an expression of the soul and the ideals of the community. Just as in Russia, Nazi art was going to be imposed from the top down as part of the principles of the Führer, art was to be held above all else, including culture, religion, and politics, had to be purely in the service of the Volk, the people. And dissenting from aesthetic standards was akin to treason, betraying the people. Uh, and the art was going to be almost Nietzschean in its attempt to create the new man, but this was nothing new. The German expressionists had been writing essays and manifestos that said the same thing as early as the 1900s. But the second biggest parallel between socialist realism and the Nazi principles is that they were somewhat vague. They both
Definite wiggle room.
Yeah, they both talked about art needing to be in the service of some all-encompassing cause that's rebuilding man and rebuilding society, but in neither case do they actually say anything. The principles were much more procedural than aesthetic, and that's true of both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. They were about making sure that the propaganda machine functioned properly, and not necessarily as much about making sure that the art followed a specific style. In practice, that meant that all art was going to go through official art shows where proper artists could exhibit on the old model of the Paris Salon.
Okay.
So we've just gone full circle.
Mm.
But unlike in Paris, there was going to be no avant garde hustling business on the side because there was going to be no freedom for an independent artist to make his own paintings and try to sell them to self loathing bourgeois types. In fact, if both Hitler and Stalin had their way, there would be no bourgeois types at all.
I love that Hitler outlawed himself. It's like, he was that hustler trying to sell his paintings on the street. The first thing he does, no more carny stuff.
The biggest parallel between Hitler and Stalin was how they both dealt with art that was not ideologically compliant. Just as the Soviets wrote it off with a label called formalist that was never quite well defined, but could be used to tar and feather all their enemies, the Nazis used the word degenerate. And the most famous art exhibition from the Third Reich was held concurrently with the opening of the House of Art in 1937 to show the masses what was being cleansed. It was titled the Entartet Kunst, or Degenerate Art Exhibition.
It looks like a Muppet.
The House of Art was opened in 1937, but the Degenerate Art exhibition had been promised from day one. In 1933, when the Nazis rose to power, the German newspapers ran a manifesto of sorts titled What German Artists Expect from the Government. It promised that there would be only one channel for art and that it would favor the people who chose loyalty to the German tradition over modernist trends. It also promised that all modernist and Bolshevik art was going to be removed. More importantly, it promised that all the modernist shit was going to be gathered into a single exhibition where every work was going to be shown with a price tag to show just how much was paid for it so that they could then be put to good use as fuel for heating public buildings. There actually were a few earlier and smaller mocking exhibits of modernist art with titles like The Chamber of Artistic Horrors, Art in the Service of Disinformation. We
Wow.
haven't moved 1 millimeter since the
Nope.
30s. And the, well, let's call it provocatively titled exhibit, The Eternal Jew.
Oh my.
But in late 1936, when the House of Art was close enough to being opened, Goebbels commissioned the famous Degenerate Art exhibition, allowing any art that was made since 1910 that was deemed ugly or degenerate. So, a panel of German experts traveled the countryside, going from museum to museum, confiscating almost 16,000 works of art. Certain Nazi brass officials, particularly Goring, took a few of the paintings for their own personal collections, but the rest of the art was either sold abroad or burned. But what would you have seen at the actual Degenerate Art exhibition? Well, on the screen right now, you have actual pages from the program, from the official program.
God.
It was held at the House of Art, but in the back rooms with bad lighting and no frames. Uh, Here are some choice excerpts from the catalog translated into English. And I want to draw attention to some of the language used because this is not just an eccentric professor's collection of ugly art. This is a central node in a propaganda machine that was supposed to mold the country's cultural output. So, again, these are direct quotes. Providing through the display of original works an insight into the harrowing cultural decay which took place during the decades which preceded the great change in capital letters. To put an end to the endless chattering by some writers and cliques who still today deny that there was any degeneration in art forms. The more things change,
Yep.
the more they stay the same.
Yep.
To make clear that the degeneration of art was more than just a passing rush of a few fools, which only died out with the National Socialist Revolution. It aims to show that this was not a natural progression of culture, but a planned attack on the essence and existence of art in general. It aims to show the ideological, political, racial intentions and moral goals which were the driving forces behind the degeneration. It will also demonstrate the extent to which this deliberately driven degeneracy attracted imitators who, despite the latter's earlier and sometimes later proven talent, joined in with this overall Jewish and Bolshevist nonsense. So if Hitler were alive today, he would be saying that he doesn't just hate the superhero movies that destroyed quality cinema. He also curses Hollywood for vacuuming up all the upcoming talent, which could be used to produce something good.
Yeah. Okay, when he's right, he's right.
In our first episode, we took the piss out of the whole enterprise of modern and contemporary art, saying it consisted of something ugly, flanked by a blurb of about how it challenges us or starts a conversation or breaks barriers or looks forward or whatever. Now, I promise you, our loyal viewers, that I had not read this when I started this series. But this is an excerpt from Hitler's speech during the opening of the Munich House of Art, included in the program for the Degenerate Art exhibit. And I promise you, I did not read this until a week ago. I would like to take this opportunity to state that I have made up my mind to put an end to the meaningless phraseology in German art. Works of art which cannot be understood and cannot speak for themselves, but require a verbose set of instructions in order to find some shy creature who patiently listens to such stupid and brazen nonsense, will from no longer be seen by the German people.
Daddy's home, folks.
All these catchy phrases such as inner experience, strong minded, a powerful desire, feeling which is pregnant with the future, heroic attitude, significant intuitive powers, inward experience of a system of time, original primitivity, and so forth, all of these stupid phrases and meaningless formulations will not excuse or recommend products which are substandard and without intrinsic value. If someone has a strong will or inner experience, let him demonstrate it by his work, not by empty phrases. I leave that quote without comment.
Yeah.
I could find some full color copies of the paintings in the catalog, but I decided to show the pages of the black and white document because that's how it was meant to be consumed. The only difference is that this version is translated into English, and if you're a keener, you can pause the video and read it if you're so inclined. But the illustrations and pagination are exactly the same as it was in the original German catalog. The Degenerate Art exhibition was divided the works into 9 groups, each of which got one room. First, you had the barbarity of the destruction of form and color. This is mainly a dig at the German expressionists, both pre-World War I, like Kirchner, who killed himself, and post-World War I new objectivity types like Otto Dix. If you watched our Weimar episode, you might recognize a couple of these paintings here. The second room is mockery of religion, or as the catalog says, what the Jewish media claims to be German religion.
Wow. Yeah.
This group primarily went after Emil Nold, who, interestingly enough, was a Nazi, and not just that, one of the original Nazis. But he was told when Hitler came to power that he had to give up painting if he wanted to remain in good standing.
Hitler held a grudge.
There's a later dig in the catalog about how Old Testament stories never seem to be besmirched by the Jewish purveyors of this kind of art. Again, I leave that without comment because I don't want to get banned. The third group was art of political content. This was also mostly German Expressionism and the Dadaists. This art preached that people should think of themselves as victims because they're stuck in a state of mental and physical slavery. Can you believe if there was any of that messaging today?
It's like every Starbucks barista thinks that.
Room number 4 was Marxist propaganda, specifically that which depicts the army in an unflattering way or encourages people to refuse military service. Room number 5 had art that depicted humanity as, quote, harlots and pimps. For a bit of context, the redeemed hooker was a common trope in Russian literature, especially Russian literature of a more utopian flavor, often written by a westernizer in the second half of the 20th century. And a lot of these westernizers belong to the same ethno-religious group that Hitler didn't like so much.
What a strange coincidence.
The caption here talks about the, quote, Bolshevik Jewess Rosa Luxemburg, saying she loved Russian literature because it, quote, ennobles the prostitute and raises her to, quote, moral purity and female heroism.
Sex work is work, you guys.
Yeah, I know. There's nothing new under the sun. The catalog talks about how, again and again, the morality of the prostitute is compared to the evil woman with bourgeois values. Again, like you said, sex work is real work.
Yep.
You can almost see the caption "sex work is real work" on
Yep.
some of these paintings here.
Oh, yeah.
Next, you had groups 6 and 7. Again, tell me if you can see any parallels today. Group 6 was art that raises up the Negro as some sort of ideal.
Weird.
And Group 7 was art that idealized idiots, cripples, and people with disabilities.
Oh, yeah, this is weirdly familiar. Okay.
In the top left, if you squint, there is a sentence that I can't help but feel resonates every time I see a trailer for a movie like Dear White People Are Precious. Uh, quote, it is important to emphasize that this, let's say, ninja art, because I don't want to be banned. It's important to emphasize that this ninja art is crafted in such a barbaric manner that even the Negro would justifiably object to see himself in these figures.
Yeah. I said that about all the black women statues they're putting up all over the place.
Yep. Room 8 was full of miscellaneous Jewish art. I've blown the painting in the upper right on the catalog. I've blown that up here. Quote, to prevent any misunderstandings, this is only a small selection of the many Jewish concoctions in this exhibition. The point of this room was that since Jewish critics and the media love to brag about the Jewish contribution to modern art, we're going to showcase a whole room full of Jewish contributions. And like I said, I had to blow up that one self-portrait by Ludwig Meidner. When you compare this to Nazi propaganda, you kind of see why some Jews say that Jewish humor is indistinguishable from anti-Semitism, because this was a self-portrait.
Yeah, it could be could be a scene out of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Yeah. Well, somehow the same guy did another self-portrait that's even more of an ethnic caricature.
Wow, it looks like John Leguizamo's portrayal of Toulouse.
Yeah, you're right. Holy shit.
Moulin Rouge fans, that one's for you.
So just as the Armory show ended in a room called the Chamber of Horrors, filled with Cubist and Futurist paintings, so too did the Degenerate Art exhibition. Room 9 was roughly translated as Accomplished Insanity, which was a sample platter of the various isms that we looked at in our 1920s episodes. Once again, I'm going to read from the catalog verbatim, and I want you to tell me if this sounds familiar. One of them ended up painting with only the contents of garbage cans. Another was content with 3 black lines on a large white surface. One had the urge to paint, quote, some circles on 2 square meters of canvas. A fourth used 3 kilograms of paint because he could not decide if his face should be green or sulfur yellow, round or square. In this part of the exhibition, visitors normally just shake their heads and laugh, and not without reason. But when you consider that all this, quote, art was removed from the display of the art collections and museums of the large German cities, then you can laugh no longer.
Yeah, that resonates.
This was written in 1937. I stand by my case that art was already dead at this point.
Yep.
Hitler may have thought he could save it, just like other thinkers certainly thought they could save it. But at some point, you have to realize that there have been no new ideas in a really long time. And there aren't going to be any new ideas because creative energy is just being channeled into other endeavors these days. Painting with garbage was probably a reference to the Dadaists, but the point is that these days you can't even shock bourgeois sensibilities by painting with garbage because shock requires originality, and that was done before World War II.
Yep.
So I think we're going to call this episode here. This is as good a place to break as any. In the next episode, we are going to look at a much more tangible aspect of Nazi and Soviet culture, and that is architecture. I hope you guys join us for that one.
All right, you know the drill. Like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Support us at kofi.com/Radio Free History or at subscribestar.com/radio-free-history.